The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of whispers and the sound of heels clicking on the marble floor. It was a scene familiar to many, television cameras focused on the man at the center of it all, but this time, it wasn't a product launch or a groundbreaking announcement. This time, it was a battle of another kind, one that could unravel everything Elon Musk had worked so hard to build. The space had a chilling air of formality, a contrast to the usual atmosphere that Musk was used to in his high-tech, fast-moving world. Tesla's cutting-edge vehicles, SpaceX's missions to Mars, and his ventures into electric transportation had always been filled with excitement, innovation, and a sense of limitless possibility. But today, in this courtroom, it felt like none of that mattered. Today, he was not a visionary, he was a defendant. "All rise," the bailiff's voice rang out. The tension in the room escalated as the judge entered. People scrambled in their seats, and Elon, always cool under pressure, remained still, his hands resting lightly on the desk in front of him. He wore his trademark black suit, looking every bit the CEO he was, but inside, his mind was racing. This wasn't the kind of challenge he was used to. His mind wasn't focused on rockets, AI, or electric cars, it was wrapped up in the much more mundane and dangerous world of legal battles. The judge took her seat. The courtroom quieted. "Elon Musk, you stand here today facing accusations of financial mismanagement and defamation. How do you plead?" The judge's voice was steady but stern. Elon looked up, meeting her gaze. There was no panic in his eyes, just the sharp, calculated focus of someone who had spent years solving impossible problems. He took a slow breath, then spoke. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The words hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, everyone in the room felt the weight of his confidence. It wasn't arrogance, it was the calm assurance of a man who had spent his life pushing boundaries, not just in business, but in everything he did. He was not afraid of this fight. He'd faced much worse before. "Then we will proceed with the evidence," the judge announced, signaling the start of the proceedings. Elon's legal team was already prepared, but Musk had something up his sleeve that no one expected. It was no secret that his reputation had been marred by controversial statements, both on Twitter and in interviews. The media had seized upon every misstep, turning his every word into a headline. But the accusations against him in this trial were far more serious. If proven, they could cost him everything: his companies, his reputation, his freedom. For weeks, the media had been full of stories about his company's alleged financial discrepancies. It was the kind of scandal that could crush a person's career, especially someone in his position. Yet, as the proceedings began, Musk wasn't showing the usual signs of worry. He sat there with his hands folded, his face unreadable, a stark contrast to the images of frantic businessmen on the brink of collapse that often flooded the news. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning, a voice echoed in the back of Musk's mind as he thought about the larger impact this trial could have. The world was watching. The stakes were high, and while many might have expected a sensational downfall, he had other plans. "Mr. Musk," the prosecutor began, flipping through a thick stack of papers. "You stand accused of misleading your investors and mismanaging billions of dollars in company funds. Your words and actions have caused irreparable harm to shareholders, and we will prove that today." Elon's lips pressed into a thin line. He had heard all of this before. The attacks on his character, the misinterpretation of his intentions. It wasn't the first time he'd been in the media spotlight for all the wrong reasons. But this was different. This time, the charges were more serious. Elon's mind began to work, as it always did, in a way that few could follow. He had always been known for his unconventional thinking. His ability to look at a problem from a different angle had allowed him to succeed in business where others had failed. And right now, he wasn't thinking about defending himself the traditional way. His team of lawyers were prepared to go through the motions, presenting their arguments, and attempting to dismantle the prosecution's case piece by piece. But Musk knew the real battle wouldn't be fought with documents and charts. It would be fought with strategy and wit. He had come to realize that in life, as in business, the real key to success often lay in the unexpected. In the surprise. In the brilliance that no one saw coming. As the prosecution began presenting its case, Musk leaned back in his chair, observing carefully. He wasn't just looking for holes in their arguments, he was looking for an opening. A flaw. Something that would allow him to flip the entire case on its head. For now, though, the courtroom was quiet. The tension was palpable. And as the judge looked over her glasses, she seemed to sense that something unusual was about to unfold. Elon's mind raced. He had an instinct for this, a way of seeing patterns others missed. He wasn't just going to sit back and wait for his team to fight his battles. No, he was going to do something no one expected. But for now, he kept his thoughts to himself. Today was just the beginning, and the world was about to see a different side of Elon Musk, the legal strategist. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk wasn't the type of person who easily allowed the world to see what he was truly feeling. He'd spent years building an empire from nothing, and every time the world seemed to doubt him, he had found a way to prove them wrong. Whether it was launching rockets, developing electric cars, or disrupting entire industries, Elon had always been the one with the vision, and the courage to see it through. But today, as he sat in that courtroom, something felt different. It wasn't the same as negotiating business deals or pitching new technologies. This time, there was no product to sell, no grand innovation to showcase. There was only a single question: could he navigate the complex, unpredictable world of law? Could he outsmart a system that was designed to crush people like him, to break them down with endless legal jargon, witness testimonies, and a barrage of paperwork? The answer, at least in that moment, wasn't entirely clear. To most people, Elon Musk was a name that evoked images of futuristic cars, groundbreaking space missions, and the boldest ideas of the 21st century. But behind the headlines, beyond the public persona, there was a different man, a man who had been shaped by the trials of life and the scars of failure. Elon had grown up in Pretoria, South Africa, in a family that, by all accounts, was far from wealthy. His father, Elon Musk, was an electromechanical engineer, and his mother, May Musk, was a dietitian and model. But the family dynamic was anything but typical. Elon's parents had separated when he was young, and he often found himself isolated, buried in books, and spending time in the world of technology and invention. Elon's early life was marked by a series of struggles, bullying, personal challenges, and a yearning for something more. He was never the popular kid, and his classmates would often mock his interests. But Elon wasn't deterred. He immersed himself in the world of computers, teaching himself programming languages at an age when most kids were still struggling with basic arithmetic. His love for technology became a driving force in his life. But even as he found success in various entrepreneurial ventures, from founding Zip2 to later launching PayPal, Elon was constantly faced with skepticism. The road to building SpaceX and Tesla had been filled with moments where even the most ardent supporters doubted his ability to make it work. But Elon wasn't afraid of failure, he had seen it up close before. He had felt the sting of rejection and loss, and it had shaped him into the man sitting in the courtroom today. In fact, failure had become a part of Elon's identity. Every failed rocket launch, every car production issue, every moment when things seemed to be falling apart, Elon had learned from it. And it wasn't just about learning from mistakes. It was about resilience, about getting up after falling down, about thinking in ways that no one else could. Now, as he sat in the courtroom, facing the biggest battle of his life, he realized that the same mindset that had led him to build revolutionary companies might be exactly what he needed to navigate this legal storm. His mind worked in overdrive, connecting dots others couldn't see, picking apart the nuances of law like he once did with a complicated engineering problem. But before the courtroom battle truly began, Elon had to look inward. He thought about the key people who had shaped his life, the relationships that had both challenged and supported him. Elon's family was a complicated web of influences. His father, Errol, was a brilliant but often distant man. Elon had never felt that deep connection with him, and their relationship had always been strained. But his mother, May, was a different story. May Musk had been a constant source of support and inspiration for Elon. She was a woman of immense strength and grace, someone who had built her own career and managed to juggle motherhood and modeling. Her resilience was something Elon admired deeply. Then there was Kimball, Elon's brother, who had always been by his side. Kimball was the grounding force in Elon's life, offering support when needed and challenging him when necessary. The bond between the two was undeniable, and Elon knew that without Kimball, he might not have taken the leap into some of his most audacious ventures. And then, of course, there was the more recent addition to his life, his children. Elon had become a father, and despite his often demanding work schedule, he cherished the time spent with them. Fatherhood had taught him patience, responsibility, and the importance of leaving a legacy that was now on the line in this courtroom. As Elon thought about these relationships, he couldn't help but feel the weight of what he stood to lose, not just his companies, but everything he had built and the people he loved. The thought of disappointing them, of letting them down, was far more painful than the thought of losing a business deal or an investment. And yet, he knew that he had to face this challenge head-on, because it wasn't just about winning the case. It was about protecting his future, his vision, and everything he had worked for. But to do that, he would need more than just the strength of his relationships. He would need something else, something that, at that moment, only he could bring to the table. Elon, however, had a plan. He wasn't just going to sit back and let his lawyers do the talking. He had something else in mind, a strategy that would turn the entire courtroom dynamic on its head. Musk's unconventional thinking had always been his greatest asset, and it was time to put that to the test in the legal world. As the trial continued, Elon sat silently, watching the proceedings unfold. He analyzed every word, every gesture. The other side's lawyers were well prepared, but they were predictable. They followed the script. They followed the rules. But Elon wasn't bound by rules in the same way. He had built an empire by breaking the mold, and he was ready to do the same here. As he watched the prosecution lay out their case, he already began formulating his next move. He was playing a long game, one that would require precision, timing, and the element of surprise. The world may have underestimated him in many ways, but in this courtroom, Elon Musk was about to prove that he was more than just a visionary entrepreneur, he was a legal genius in the making. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the courtroom, casting long shadows across the polished wood of the desks. The air was thick with anticipation. As the prosecution prepared to present its case, the tension was palpable. The entire room was watching, waiting to see how this battle would unfold. Elon remained still, his eyes focused on the prosecution's table. His team had been prepared for this moment for weeks, but the prosecution was about to take the first swing. Musk knew that what they presented in the next few hours could set the tone for the rest of the trial. And if there was one thing he knew, it was that he had to control the narrative from the very beginning. The prosecutor, a tall, sharp-faced man named Mark Harris, stepped to the front of the courtroom with a measured confidence. His tailored suit made him appear like a man who thrived in this environment, who was at home among the world of legal arguments and courtroom drama. He was calm, precise, and calculated, everything that Elon was not when it came to the law. "We are here today because of the reckless actions of Elon Musk," Harris began, his voice steady. "This man, known for his companies and his innovations, has violated the trust of his investors and the public. His reckless tweets, his erratic behavior, and his flagrant disregard for corporate governance have cost billions of dollars. And we intend to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Mr. Musk should be held accountable for these actions." Harris paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the room. There was a flicker of concern on Musk's face for a fraction of a second, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He had heard it all before, the allegations, the media outrage, the accusations of instability. But this time, they were attempting to tie it all together into a case that could have serious legal consequences. Elon Musk's statements on social media are not just misguided, they are dangerous, Harris continued. They misled investors and caused unnecessary turmoil in the financial markets. His erratic behavior is no longer just a personal issue, it is a matter of public concern. The consequences of his actions have been felt by thousands of shareholders, and we will prove that he should be held responsible for the damage he caused. Harris turned to the jury, making direct eye contact with each member. Mr. Musk's actions were not those of a businessman trying to innovate, they were the actions of a man who was using his position for personal gain, without regard for the well-being of others. Elon's legal team exchanged glances, but Musk remained unmoved. This was just the beginning. He had anticipated this kind of argument. It was a classic attack, one that aimed to paint him as a reckless, impulsive leader who cared only about his own interests. But Elon wasn't the kind of man who allowed simple narratives to define him. He was the creator of things that changed the world, and he knew the value of perseverance through chaos. Once the prosecutor finished his statement, the courtroom was silent. All eyes turned to Elon's defense team, eager to see how they would respond. But instead of jumping into a counter-argument, Elon did something unexpected. He stood up. The courtroom gasped. It wasn't common for a defendant to take the floor so early, especially when their lawyer was prepared to handle the case. But Elon wasn't just any defendant. He had always been someone who believed in confronting the narrative head-on, and now, he was ready to face it. "I need to say something," Elon said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not here to argue about tweets or the sensational stories you've heard. I'm here because I believe in my companies, and I believe in the people who trust them. I'm here because I know that what we're doing at Tesla and SpaceX is important, not just for investors, but for humanity." The jury shifted in their seats, intrigued by the unexpected turn. Elon paused, gathering his thoughts. His words were simple, yet powerful, and they carried weight far beyond the typical legal defense. "I'm not a perfect person," he continued. "I've made mistakes. But my companies, the technologies we're developing, are changing the world. I've made my share of mistakes, but those mistakes don't define the people I am or the company I've built. And I won't let anyone tell me that we're not doing the right thing." The defense team exchanged uncertain looks. James Harding, his lead attorney, knew Elon well enough to understand that his strategy was unlike anything they had prepared for. This wasn't going to be a typical legal defense. Musk was choosing to fight with his vision, with the ideas that had driven him to where he was today. He was giving the jury something to think about, something more powerful than just facts and evidence. He was speaking from the heart. Elon's words struck a chord, not just with the jury, but with everyone in the room. There was no theatrics, no anger or defensiveness in his tone. Just a clear, unapologetic conviction in what he believed. But while Elon's personal statement made an emotional impact, it was far from the entire defense. His legal team was ready to respond. James Harding rose from his seat, ready to present their case. Unlike most lawyers, Harding was calm but razor-sharp. He wasn't interested in engaging in a war of words. He was interested in precision. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Harding began, his voice low but commanding, "what Mr. Musk has just said is true. Tesla, SpaceX, and the technologies he's developed are not just about profit, they are about the future. And we will show you that, despite what the prosecution may argue, Mr. Musk's actions were never done with malintent. Every decision he made, every step he took, was guided by a singular vision, to push humanity forward." Harding didn't waste time with small talk. He dove right into the facts, pulling up evidence that supported their claim that Musk's actions were misunderstood, that his tweets were misinterpreted, and that his goals, although ambitious, had always been aimed at something larger than self-interest. "The prosecution wants you to believe that Mr. Musk's behavior was reckless," Harding continued. But we will show you that it was anything but. The nature of innovation means that you often have to take risks. Tesla wasn't built on safe bets, it was built on Elon Musk's ability to dream big, take chances, and change the world. As Harding presented his case, Elon watched, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his lips. This was it, the beginning of a battle he was determined to win. Not just for himself, but for the future of his companies, his employees, and the billions of people who would benefit from the technology he was building. Elon wasn't just facing a legal battle, he was fighting for something far more important, the legacy he had spent his life creating. And he was ready to fight. The air in the courtroom had grown tense. The prosecution had made their case with sharp, pointed accusations, painting Elon Musk as a reckless and impulsive leader who had endangered the financial well-being of thousands. But Elon's personal statement, backed by his legal team's unwavering support, had sparked a shift. The jury, the judge, and even the public in the gallery were starting to pay closer attention. It was clear that this trial wasn't going to follow the standard playbook. Elon Musk wasn't just fighting for his own reputation, he was fighting for the future of his companies, and most importantly, for a larger vision, one that extended far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy was reaching a fever pitch. News outlets were covering the trial in real time, analyzing every move and every statement. Some were quick to criticize Elon's decision to speak directly to the jury, accusing him of grandstanding, of trying to turn the trial into a spectacle. But others saw something different. They saw a man who was unafraid to stand up for his beliefs, to challenge the status quo, and to stake his reputation on his conviction. A few hours into the trial, Elon's Twitter account lit up with messages of support and skepticism alike. The tweets were a whirlwind of praise from his followers and harsh criticism from detractors. Yet, amid the noise, one thing was becoming clear: people were paying attention. This trial had become more than just a legal battle, it had become a cultural event. Elon, however, didn't waste time on the media circus. He knew that the real battle was being fought inside the courtroom. As the trial progressed, it became evident that the prosecution had underestimated Elon Musk. Their initial strategy had been to paint him as a reckless and irresponsible billionaire who had misled the public for personal gain. But Elon's response, the raw honesty and passion in his words, had thrown them off balance. In response, the prosecution tried to shift their approach. They called in a series of witnesses, financial experts, market analysts, and even former Tesla executives, who would testify about the negative impact of Musk's tweets on stock prices. The goal was to undermine Elon's credibility by painting him as someone who didn't understand the responsibility that came with his public influence. One of the key witnesses was a former Tesla board member, Alex Roberts, who had worked closely with Musk during the early days of the company's rise. He was called to testify about the infamous, funding-secured tweet Musk had posted, which had caused Tesla's stock price to skyrocket, only for the SEC to later charge him with securities fraud. Alex Roberts took the stand, looking every bit the polished corporate professional, with his expensive suit and carefully combed hair. His testimony was smooth, rehearsed, and filled with industry jargon. He spoke of the dangers of Musk's impulsive behavior and the damage it had done to Tesla's stock price. "We had always advised Mr. Musk to be cautious with his statements, especially on social media," Roberts said, his voice steady. What he saw as a simple expression of optimism was actually an incredibly irresponsible statement that led to market instability and loss of shareholder value. The jury listened intently, but Elon wasn't fazed. He knew Roberts, and while he respected him as a professional, he also knew the deeper context of what had happened. What Roberts was leaving out of his testimony was the pressure Elon had been under at the time, the pressure to meet investors' expectations, the challenges of running multiple billion-dollar companies, and the constant media scrutiny. When the cross-examination began, Elon's legal team took over. James Harding stood up, calm and measured, ready to dismantle the witness's testimony. "Mr. Roberts, you've just said that Mr. Musk's tweet was irresponsible. But do you acknowledge the pressures and challenges that come with running a company like Tesla? Harding asked. Alex Roberts shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Of course, there are pressures, but that doesn't excuse the impact his words had. But you're implying that one tweet caused Tesla's stock to rise dramatically, correct? Harding countered, raising an eyebrow. What you're failing to mention is that Tesla's stock had been on an upward trajectory long before that tweet. The market response was not just about one tweet, it was a reflection of the broader success of Tesla and the growing confidence in Elon Musk's leadership. The room went silent. Harding's words had planted a seed of doubt in the minds of the jury. He was right. Tesla's stock had been climbing steadily for months, fueled by the company's innovative products, its growing reputation, and Musk's relentless drive. The "funding secured" tweet may have been a catalyst for the increase, but it wasn't the sole cause. Elon sat back in his seat, watching the legal chess match unfold. He had known that this trial would be full of twists and turns, but what he hadn't expected was the subtle shift in tactics. The prosecution was no longer simply trying to accuse him of being reckless, they were attempting to frame him as a man who had manipulated the system for his own personal gain. As the days wore on, Elon's defense team continued to present their case, challenging every piece of evidence the prosecution put forward. The courtroom was becoming more and more captivated by the way Elon's legal team was handling the case. There was a precision to their arguments, a strategy that felt both methodical and instinctual. But it was when Elon himself took the stand again that things truly began to shift. After several days of legal arguments and witness testimonies, Elon's defense team requested the opportunity for Musk to speak directly to the jury once more. The judge, though skeptical, allowed it. This time, however, Elon wasn't just defending his actions, he was revealing the truth behind his decisions. He spoke candidly about the struggles he faced running multiple companies, about the constant pressure to meet expectations, and about the human cost of innovation. "I know that I've made mistakes," Elon said, his voice steady. "But I've never acted out of malice or greed. Every decision I made was to push my companies forward, to bring something new into the world that could change things for the better. And yes, that sometimes means making tough choices and taking risks." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I've always believed that the future of humanity depends on our ability to innovate and take chances. Whether it's going to Mars or transitioning to sustainable energy, these are not just business ventures, they are missions. And with missions, there are no guarantees." The jury was silent, hanging on his every word. For the first time, Elon Musk wasn't just a businessman defending himself, he was a visionary explaining why his actions, even if they were controversial, were rooted in something far greater than personal gain. Elon Musk had just delivered a masterstroke. The prosecution's attempt to frame him as a reckless, self-serving businessman was now undercut by the raw truth of his own words. By the time he finished his statement, the atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. What had once seemed like a straightforward legal battle was now a deeper conversation about the nature of innovation, risk, and the cost of progress. The prosecution might have had the evidence, but Elon Musk had something they didn't: vision. And that vision was slowly beginning to win over the jury. The courtroom had grown colder as the days wore on, with the tension between the defense and prosecution growing palpable. Each side knew that the stakes were high, and the jury was starting to show signs of becoming more divided. The prosecution's case had leaned heavily on financial expert testimony and character attacks, but Elon Musk's defense strategy had proven to be unexpectedly powerful. However, as the trial entered its final stretch, it was clear that the true turning point had arrived. It was no longer just about the legal arguments, the witnesses, or even the high-profile nature of the trial. The heart of the case, what would ultimately determine the verdict, was about to be laid bare in a way no one expected. The prosecution had been rattled by Elon's testimony, his ability to speak with such raw honesty and emotion. They had not anticipated that he would stand up and reveal the deeply personal motivations behind his decisions. They had expected a cold, corporate defense, one filled with legal jargon and technical arguments. But Musk's words had unsettled them. So, they decided to pull out their own emotional weapon, an unexpected witness who could offer a stark contrast to Elon's vision. It was an old acquaintance of Musk's, a former Tesla employee named Linda Hayes, who had worked closely with him during some of the company's most challenging years. Hayes was a brilliant engineer, but she had left Tesla under controversial circumstances. She had been one of the few employees who had seen the darker side of Elon's leadership firsthand. Linda Hayes stepped into the witness box, her demeanor calm but distant. Her testimony was calculated, and she spoke with an almost clinical detachment. "I worked for Tesla for over 5 years," she began, "and while I respected Elon's drive, I also saw firsthand the chaos he caused. His decisions were often impulsive, driven by emotion rather than logic. The toll it took on employees, the burnout, the endless pressure, it was unsustainable. People suffered under his leadership." She paused, glancing briefly at Elon, her eyes hard. "I understand what he's trying to do with his companies. But the truth is, his behavior is reckless, and it's not just about the financial fallout. It's about the human cost of that vision." The jury was silent, absorbing her words. The courtroom was filled with an uncomfortable stillness. Elon had never been one to shy away from criticism, but this hit differently. He knew Linda, and her words cut deep. But what the jury didn't know was the rest of the story. They didn't know about the personal sacrifices Elon had made, the long nights working side by side with his teams to ensure that Tesla and SpaceX would succeed. They didn't know the toll it had taken on him, on his family, on his mental health, on his relationships. As Linda Hayes' testimony continued, Elon felt something stir within him. He wasn't angry, but rather overwhelmed with a deep sense of sadness. Sadness for the things he had lost in the pursuit of his dreams, and for the people who had felt hurt along the way. He had never fully opened up about the emotional cost of his journey. In the public eye, he had always been the confident, almost untouchable figure, someone who could handle any challenge with a steely resolve. But in this courtroom, with the weight of Linda's words hanging heavy in the air, Elon found himself facing something he had long avoided: vulnerability. It was in that moment, as the emotional weight of the trial and its toll on his personal life collided, that he realized the truth of the matter. No one had seen the true sacrifices he had made. No one understood the long hours, the sleepless nights, the personal relationships that had been strained to the breaking point. The only thing that had ever mattered to him was his vision for the future of humanity, of space exploration, of sustainable energy, and yet, it had come at a cost that even he hadn't fully grasped. As Linda Hayes finished her testimony and left the stand, the room was filled with the hum of whispers. The emotional tension in the room was palpable. It was clear that Linda's testimony had shaken the jury. She had presented an image of Elon that no one had expected, a leader who was driven by ambition but at the cost of those around him. A man whose brilliance was overshadowed by the fallout from his decisions. But Elon had one last chance to respond. The courtroom was silent as he stood up, his heart heavy with everything he had just heard. This time, he wasn't speaking as a defendant, he was speaking as a man who had come to terms with his own flaws. "Linda is right," Elon began, his voice low but steady. "I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, big mistakes. I've pushed people too hard. I've put my vision before the people who helped me build these companies. And I regret that." He paused, his gaze drifting to the jury. "But what I've never regretted is the vision itself. I've always believed that the only way to create something truly groundbreaking is to take risks, to push past the boundaries of what's comfortable. But that comes with a price. And yes, sometimes that price is people I care about, people who have sacrificed alongside me." Elon took a deep breath, the weight of the moment hanging heavy on his shoulders. "I've always believed in the importance of innovation. I believe in pushing humanity forward. But what I've come to realize is that the journey is just as important as the destination. And I've learned that lesson the hard way. The room was silent. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself had slowed down. Elon Musk, the man who had built two of the most innovative companies in the world, the man who had dreamed of colonizing Mars, was finally allowing himself to be human. "I've asked a lot of the people around me," he continued. "But the one thing I never asked was for their forgiveness. I don't expect it. But I hope you all can understand that the decisions I made, the things I've done, they were never out of malice. They were out of a desire to do something greater than myself." His words, raw and unfiltered, hung in the air for a long time. The prosecution had painted him as a reckless billionaire, but in this moment, the truth of Elon Musk, the man who had sacrificed everything for his vision, was finally laid bare. The jury was visibly moved. Some looked down at their hands, some exchanged glances, and others wiped their eyes. Elon's vulnerability had done what his legal arguments could not, it had humanized him. In that instant, the courtroom saw the person behind the public persona, the visionary who had always been driven by something greater than himself, even at the expense of his own personal happiness. The emotional climax of the trial had arrived, and it was clear that things would never be the same again. No longer was this simply about the legal battle, this had become a trial of character. And for the first time, Elon Musk had allowed himself to be seen for who he truly was. The air in the courtroom seemed to vibrate with an energy that hadn't been present before. Elon Musk's emotional testimony had completely shifted the dynamic of the trial. What had begun as a battle over tweets, stock prices, and securities fraud had now evolved into something much deeper, a trial of humanity, vision, and the cost of innovation. The jury had been visibly moved by Elon's honesty, and the prosecution's sharp, cold arguments seemed to fall flat in comparison. Musk had done something unexpected, he had made himself vulnerable, not as a billionaire or a CEO, but as a person who had paid a heavy price for his ambitions. Elon sat in his seat, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of the table. He knew the tide was turning, but he wasn't sure if it was enough. His legal team, who had been tense and on edge throughout the trial, now sat a little straighter. They had always believed in his vision for the defense, but they couldn't ignore the monumental weight of the moment. The prosecution, though shaken, wasn't ready to give up just yet. They had one final card to play, one last piece of the puzzle they hoped would break Elon's defense. Their strategy had been to present Elon as a man whose brilliance was overshadowed by a dangerous impulsiveness. But now, after the emotional testimony and Musk's raw self-reflection, they realized they needed to refocus on his intentions. If they couldn't break him emotionally, they would try to do so through the law itself. The prosecutor, Henry Clayton, a seasoned lawyer known for his steely resolve and relentless cross-examinations, stood up, pacing slowly in front of the jury. His gaze moved from one juror to the next, as if measuring their responses. "Mr. Musk," Clayton began, his voice calm but laden with authority, "you've spoken at length about your vision, your sacrifices, your intentions. But there's one fundamental question that has yet to be answered." Elon looked up, his expression steady. He had expected this. The prosecution would always try to bring things back to legality, to the heart of the matter, whether he had broken the law and the consequences of his actions. Clayton paused, letting the silence settle before continuing. "You've stated repeatedly that you were motivated by the future of humanity, by progress, by the grander vision of what your companies could achieve. But in doing so, you neglected the laws, the financial responsibilities, and most importantly, the people who trusted you." Elon shifted in his seat. He could see where this was going. "Your tweets were not just careless, they were deliberate. They were intended to manipulate the market, to stir the stock prices of your company. Now, you may want us to believe that these were innocent mistakes, but there is no escaping the fact that your actions were reckless, and they had real consequences." Clayton's words were designed to be a gut punch, to undermine the emotional ground that Elon had so carefully staked out in the jury's minds. He continued with calculated precision. "Mr. Musk, you may be a visionary, but you're also a man who stands above the law. You make decisions without regard for the rules that bind us all. And you expect the world to follow your every whim, no matter the cost. So, I ask again, do you believe your actions were justified? The room was still, every eye fixed on Elon. It was a moment of reckoning. The jury, which had been so moved by his personal story, was now faced with the hard facts of the case, the legal ramifications, the potential financial fallout, and the ethical questions surrounding his decisions. Elon took a deep breath, his gaze fixed ahead. For a moment, he was quiet, gathering his thoughts. Then, he stood, facing the jury and the prosecution. I never intended to manipulate the market, Elon began, his voice firm but measured. Yes, I've made mistakes, and yes, I've taken risks. But I didn't make those decisions to deceive anyone. I made them because I believed in something bigger. I believed in the future of Tesla, the future of clean energy, and the future of humanity. He paused, his hands gripping the edge of the podium. But I'll tell you this, he continued, I understand now the consequences of my actions. I see the ripple effect they caused, and I regret that. I never wanted to put anyone in harm's way, and I never intended to mislead anyone. Elon's eyes scanned the courtroom, finally landing on the jury. But you have to understand something, he said, his voice growing more intense. The road to innovation isn't always clear. It's full of ambiguity, full of moments where you take a leap of faith. And yes, sometimes, you stumble. But if we don't take those risks, if we don't push the boundaries, then what are we left with? A world stuck in the status quo. He paused again, letting the weight of his words sink in. I made mistakes. I accept that. But I did it with the intention of changing the world. And I believe, despite all the setbacks, that I am doing something meaningful. The room was still as Elon finished his statement. His words hung in the air, heavy with the gravity of his mission. For the first time in the trial, he had fully embraced the complexity of the situation, that while his intentions had always been for the greater good, the consequences of his actions were undeniable. The jury sat in silence. There were no immediate reactions, no sudden gasps or reactions of disbelief. Instead, there was a quiet contemplation, a moment of pause as each juror weighed Elon's words against the cold, hard facts presented by the prosecution. It was clear that this trial had become more than just a legal battle. It had become a moral question, one that each juror had to answer for themselves. Was Elon Musk guilty of breaking the law? Yes, that was a fact. But was he a man who had acted out of malice or greed? That was a question only they could answer. The defense team exchanged subtle nods. They knew they had done all they could. Elon had given everything in this trial, his ambition, his vision, his regrets, and his humanity. Now, it was out of their hands. As the trial wrapped up, the judge called for a brief recess before the closing arguments. Judge Karen Matthews, a no-nonsense figure who had presided over countless high-profile cases, sat at her bench, quietly observing the developments. She had seen countless cases of corporate wrongdoing, but there was something unique about this one. She knew that Elon Musk wasn't just a businessman facing legal charges. He was a symbol of the modern age, a man whose influence reached far beyond his companies. And his words, his defense, had struck a chord with more than just the jury, they had challenged the very idea of what it meant to take risks and innovate. As the recess began, the room buzzed with murmurs. The trial was entering its final phase, and everyone knew that the verdict would change everything, both for Elon Musk and for the future of corporate accountability in the digital age. The tension in the courtroom was nearly unbearable. After weeks of emotional testimonies, legal maneuvering, and personal revelations, the trial was finally nearing its end. The jury, the judge, and everyone else present knew that the next few hours would determine Elon Musk's fate. The final arguments were about to begin, and the stakes had never been higher. Henry Clayton, the lead prosecutor, stood up first. He was a seasoned lawyer, known for his sharp intellect and ability to deliver devastating closing arguments. Today, however, he knew that the emotional ground had shifted in Elon's favor. The jury had witnessed Musk's vulnerability, heard his remorse, and seen a side of him that few had expected. But Clayton wasn't about to give up without a fight. He began his closing with a calm, measured tone, his eyes scanning the room with intensity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Clayton began, "we've heard a lot of words over the past few weeks. We've heard talk of innovation, of vision, of humanity's future. But the law is not about intentions. It's not about grand ideas or lofty goals. The law is about responsibility. It's about accountability." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in before continuing. "Mr. Musk may have had grand plans, but those plans don't give him the right to act above the law. His reckless actions, his impulsive decisions, caused real harm. His tweets manipulated the market. They misled investors. And while we can sympathize with his vision, we cannot overlook the damage his behavior caused." Clayton's voice grew firmer as he pressed on. "Every action has consequences. And Mr. Musk has failed to accept responsibility for the harm he caused. He may claim that his heart was in the right place, but the law doesn't ask about hearts or intentions. It asks about actions. And those actions, his actions, were illegal." The prosecution's case had been built on the idea that Musk's actions were reckless, manipulative, and deserving of punishment. Clayton's closing argument reinforced that position, framing Musk not as a visionary, but as a man who had crossed a line and needed to be held accountable. Now it was the defense's turn. Elon's lawyer, Maria Ortega, rose to her feet. A calm, collected woman with a fierce intellect, Maria had been instrumental in framing Elon's defense. Throughout the trial, she had carefully navigated the complex legal terrain, but she had also remained focused on a central theme: the value of innovation and the spirit of progress. Maria began her closing argument by addressing the heart of the prosecution's case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice clear and confident, "the prosecution has painted a picture of Elon Musk as a reckless man driven solely by his ambitions, a man who used his position for personal gain without regard for the consequences. But that is not the whole story. In fact, it's far from it." She paused, her gaze moving across the jury. "Mr. Musk is not a man who takes decisions lightly. He is a man who has revolutionized entire industries that many said were impossible to change. He's not just building a business. He's building a future. And yes, in that pursuit, mistakes have been made. But mistakes are part of the process of creating something groundbreaking." Maria's voice softened slightly, adding a human touch to her argument. "Think about what you've heard in this courtroom. You've heard from a man who has poured his life, his energy, and his soul into creating companies that have changed the world. And, yes, he has stumbled along the way. But those stumbles are a part of what it means to take risks. To create. To push boundaries." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. "You've also heard from Mr. Musk himself. He has acknowledged his mistakes. He has shown remorse for the impact of his actions. But that's not the whole picture either. His intent was never to deceive. It was to innovate, to push forward, and to secure a future that will benefit all of us. And while the consequences of his actions are undeniable, we must ask ourselves, is that the same as fraud? Is that the same as deliberate manipulation?" Maria's words were measured but impassioned. She wasn't asking for sympathy, she was asking the jury to look beyond the legal framework and see the larger picture. Elon Musk has built something that the world desperately needs. Clean energy. Sustainable technology. Space exploration. These are not just lofty dreams, these are the futures that we, as a society, depend on. And we cannot let the fear of failure stifle innovation. If we do, we risk losing out on the very advancements that could save our planet and our species. The defense team had one final task, to remind the jury that they were not just judging Elon Musk for his actions, but for the larger ideals he represented. His mistakes, while significant, did not define him as a criminal, they defined him as a flawed human being striving for something greater. After Maria finished her closing argument, the courtroom fell into silence. It was time for Elon Musk to address the jury one last time. He had been quiet throughout the closing arguments, allowing his legal team to do the talking. But now, he stood up to deliver his final statement. This was not about legal strategy or facts, it was personal. This was Elon Musk's chance to speak directly to the people who held his future in their hands. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice steady but sincere, I've said it before, but I want to say it again, I've made mistakes. I've made decisions that, in hindsight, I regret. But I want to make one thing clear, I did not intend to deceive anyone. I did not intend to cause harm. Elon paused for a moment, collecting his thoughts. He had come a long way in this trial, from a confident billionaire to a man who had bared his soul to the world. My goal has always been to create something meaningful. I wanted to change the world. I wanted to make a difference. And I still believe that we can. I know that sometimes the road to progress isn't easy, and it's not always pretty. But I believe that if we stop taking risks, if we stop dreaming big, we'll lose everything that makes us human. He glanced at the jury, his expression open and vulnerable. I'm asking you to see me for who I am, not just the CEO of Tesla or SpaceX, but a man who has dedicated his life to a vision of a better future. Yes, I've made mistakes. But I also believe that the future is worth fighting for. Judge Matthews stood up, signaling the end of the closing arguments. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she said, her voice calm but firm, you have heard all the arguments. It is now your duty to deliberate and render a verdict. Remember, you must base your decision solely on the evidence presented in this courtroom. Do not be swayed by public opinion or emotion, only the facts matter. The judge's words hung in the air as she excused the jury to begin deliberations. The courtroom was left in a heavy silence, the weight of the decision to come pressing down on everyone present. Elon sat down, his heart racing. He had done everything he could. Now, it was up to the jury. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. The trial had now reached its most critical moment. After days of compelling arguments, emotional testimonies, and legal wrangling, the jury had retired to deliberate. The weight of the decision that they were about to make loomed over the room like a heavy cloud, casting a shadow over everyone present. For Elon Musk, this was the moment of reckoning. As the minutes stretched into hours, the tension was palpable. Elon sat in his seat, his mind racing with thoughts of the future, both the success of his companies and the uncertainty of his legal fate. The courtroom had emptied except for his legal team, who were gathered around him, discussing strategy. They had done all they could, now it was up to the jury. The deliberations stretched on longer than expected. At first, the defense team had been hopeful, believing the emotional weight of Elon's testimony would sway the jury toward leniency. But as the hours passed, doubt crept into their minds. What were they discussing? Were they torn? Was there a possibility that the prosecution's arguments about legal responsibility and accountability would overpower the jury's empathy for Elon's intentions? The longer the deliberation continued, the more restless Elon became. He tried to keep himself distracted, checking his phone for messages, making small talk with his legal team, but it was all a blur. Every minute felt like an eternity. His thoughts kept circling back to the trial. Could he have done anything differently? Could he have been more cautious with his words? More careful with his actions? He had been driven by a desire to change the world, to push the limits of what was possible. But at what cost? Late in the afternoon, as the clock ticked past 5, Judge Matthews called everyone back into the courtroom. The room fell silent as the jury filed back into the box. Their faces were unreadable, and Elon's heart began to race. He tried to maintain his composure, but there was no denying the anxiety that gripped him. Elon stood beside his legal team, his mind going over everything he had said, everything his lawyers had argued. He had been honest, vulnerable, and forthright. There was nothing more he could do now. It was out of his hands. The judge took her seat, and everyone stood as the jury foreman, a middle-aged man named David Collins, stood to address the court. He looked around the room, his expression serious, his hands gripping the envelope containing the verdict. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Foreman Collins began, his voice steady, "we have reached a verdict. In the case of the United States versus Elon Musk, on the charge of securities fraud, we the jury find the defendant." A pregnant pause. Elon's stomach flipped. Every eye in the courtroom was on the jury foreman. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. "Not guilty," he said, his voice clear and resolute. The room erupted in a stunned silence. Elon's legal team exchanged looks of disbelief and relief. Elon, too, stood frozen for a moment, unable to process what he had just heard. Not guilty. The words felt surreal. He had prepared himself for any outcome, guilt, a mistrial, perhaps even a plea deal, but not this. Not this immediate, clear-cut exoneration. As the judge called for the proceedings to close, Elon allowed himself a small, cautious breath. It was over. For now, at least. The weight of the verdict hit him slowly. The legal battle had been grueling, but in that moment, the relief felt almost overwhelming. He had won, not just in the court of law, but in the court of public opinion as well. Elon Musk, the visionary, had been vindicated. His legal team surrounded him, congratulating him, shaking his hand, and patting him on the back. They had been confident all along, but even they had felt the pressure. Now, their client was free to move forward without the looming shadow of a legal conviction. But as the initial euphoria settled, something else began to take root in Elon's mind, a quiet sense of reflection. The trial had forced him to confront aspects of his own actions that he had never fully considered. It had forced him to grapple with the consequences of his decisions, to examine the personal toll that his ambition had taken not just on his companies, but on the people around him. Elon turned to face the courtroom, where his family had been sitting quietly throughout the trial. He saw his mother, May Musk, standing with tears in her eyes, a proud yet relieved smile on her face. His children were with her, and he could see in their expressions the mix of pride and concern. They had been there through it all, supporting him even when the world seemed to be questioning his every move. Elon's mind shifted back to his companies, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and all the projects that had made him a household name. He knew that he had a long road ahead, filled with new challenges, new risks, and new opportunities. But for now, this victory felt like a rare moment of peace. It was time to reflect. As Elon exited the courtroom, he was met by a swarm of reporters and cameras. The media had been waiting for this moment, his first public appearance after the trial. The flashing lights and shouted questions overwhelmed him for a moment, but he maintained his composure, walking through the crowd with a calm, collected air. A reporter yelled out, "Elon. What's next for you? What does this verdict mean for Tesla, SpaceX, and the future of your companies?" Elon paused for a moment, turning toward the microphone. "It means that we can continue pushing forward. We can continue to innovate, to make the world a better place. We can continue to dream big." His words were short but powerful, reflecting the spirit that had always driven him. The reporters shouted more questions, but Elon simply turned and continued walking toward his waiting car. The legal battle had taken its toll, but it had also reaffirmed his commitment to his mission. He wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. As the car doors closed behind him and the car pulled away, Elon allowed himself a moment to relax. The weight of the trial, of the media frenzy, and the constant public scrutiny had been exhausting. But now, with the trial behind him, there was a new sense of possibility in the air. He thought about the future. About Mars, about sustainable energy, about the ways he could change the world. He thought about the lessons he had learned, not just from the trial, but from everything he had experienced up until this point. He wasn't just a billionaire businessman. He was a man on a mission. And that mission was far from over. The courtroom doors closed behind him, and Elon Musk stepped out into the chilly evening air, his heart still pounding with the weight of the day. The world outside had already moved on, but for him, this moment was a turning point, a defining moment in both his personal and professional life. As the black Tesla Model S pulled up, Elon felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Relief, pride, uncertainty. He glanced at the night sky, where the stars shone brightly, a reminder of his ultimate goal, reaching beyond Earth, to explore and to settle on Mars. His vision had always been clear, but this trial had reminded him of something important. The road to achieving greatness was fraught with obstacles, and sometimes those obstacles came from within. Elon slid into the car and exhaled deeply. The legal battle was over, but the real challenge, securing a future for humanity, was far from finished. He turned to his assistant, Sarah, who sat beside him. Her calm demeanor was a stark contrast to his stormy thoughts. "Sarah," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "I need to make some calls. I need to refocus. The world will want answers, but I need to chart a course for the next phase of this journey." Sarah nodded, already reaching for her phone. She had been with him through thick and thin, a steady presence in the chaos of his life. Elon appreciated that. As the car began to move, Elon's mind wandered back to the trial, to the moments when his entire world seemed to be crashing down around him. The media frenzy had been relentless, the public opinion polarizing. But now that it was over, he felt a strange sense of clarity. The verdict, while significant, was just one battle in a much larger war. The future he was building wasn't about avoiding mistakes, it was about learning from them and moving forward. The media quickly latched onto the outcome of the trial. Headlines flashed across news outlets, social media buzzed with excitement, and TV shows were abuzz with discussions about Elon Musk's legal victory. To the public, it was a huge win for the billionaire entrepreneur who had overcome yet another obstacle. The verdict reinforced the image of Elon as a brilliant but misunderstood visionary, a man whose drive to change the world sometimes led him to take risks that others couldn't understand. However, amid the praise, there was also skepticism. Some commentators questioned whether the verdict truly reflected justice. Had Elon been given a free pass because of his wealth and influence? Was he truly innocent, or had the jury simply been swayed by his public persona and the emotional appeal of his defense? Elon didn't have time to dwell on the criticism. The next phase of his life awaited. He knew that the world was watching, but he couldn't let that distract him from the bigger picture. He had to focus on his companies, his mission, and the future of humanity. By the time Elon arrived at his office in Palo Alto, the excitement of the verdict had already faded into the background. His mind was consumed by the tasks ahead, the next phase of Tesla's expansion, the launch of a new SpaceX mission, and Neuralink's cutting-edge progress in brain-machine interfaces. Each of these projects, while monumental in their own right, felt like pieces of a larger puzzle that Elon was determined to complete. He sat down in his office, which had a panoramic view of the Bay Area. The golden hour light streamed through the windows, casting a soft glow across his desk. Elon allowed himself a moment of quiet, but it didn't last long. His assistant knocked lightly before entering. "Mr. Musk, we've got a meeting in 10 minutes with the SpaceX leadership team," Sarah said, her voice calm but urgent. "They're preparing for the upcoming launch. It's all hands on deck." Elon nodded, standing up and adjusting his jacket. "All right, let's go." The meeting was fast-paced, with the team discussing the final details of a mission that was set to send the next batch of Starlink satellites into orbit. The conversation shifted from technicalities to vision. Elon had always believed that access to reliable internet was a fundamental right, especially for those living in remote areas of the world. SpaceX's Starlink project was not just about business, it was about connecting people in underserved communities and ensuring that the future of humanity wasn't limited by geography. Throughout the meeting, Elon's mind wandered briefly to the events of the past few weeks. The trial had taken a toll on him, but it had also reminded him of the stakes involved in his work. The media may have questioned his intentions, but he knew what he was building. He knew the difference his companies could make in the world. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon turned to his team. "I know we've been focused on the here and now," he said, his voice filled with renewed determination, "but we need to think bigger. Mars is still the goal. And everything we're doing here is just a step toward that future." The room was quiet for a moment as his words sank in. Elon wasn't just talking about rockets or electric cars, he was talking about a future where humanity could thrive beyond Earth, a future where humans could become a multiplanetary species. The goal had always seemed distant, but now, with each success, it felt closer. Elon wasn't about to let anything distract him from that vision, not even a legal battle that threatened to define him. Later that evening, as Elon sat alone in his office, he reflected on the trial that had just concluded. The verdict was a victory, but it had come with a cost. His life had been laid bare for the world to see. The mistakes, the struggles, the personal cost of his ambition, it was all there for the world to judge. But now, with the weight of the trial behind him, Elon felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He had won the legal battle, but the real work was just beginning. He wasn't just fighting for the success of his companies, he was fighting for something much larger. He thought about the future, about Tesla's role in accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy, about SpaceX's missions to explore Mars, and about Neuralink's potential to revolutionize how humans interact with technology. He was determined to keep pushing, to keep innovating, and to keep fighting for the future he believed in. But there was something else that had become clearer through the trial. The world would never be kind to him just for the sake of his ideas. He would always be scrutinized, questioned, and challenged. His mistakes would be magnified. His ambitions would be doubted. And yet, Elon Musk knew one thing above all else: the pursuit of progress, true, world-changing progress, was never easy. It never had been, and it never would be. And that, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all. As Elon stared out of his office window at the sprawling city below, he made a quiet promise to himself: the road ahead would be difficult, but it would also be filled with possibilities. The future was out there, waiting to be created. He wouldn't let the past hold him back. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would continue to build toward a future where humanity could thrive. It was 3 a.m., and Elon sat alone in his office, staring at the screen in front of him. His mind buzzed with activity, a whirlwind of ideas and possibilities. The legal battle had ended, but the world was still watching. The media had given their verdict, but the real test was still ahead. His phone buzzed on the desk beside him, breaking his thoughts. It was a message from one of his closest advisors, Peter. "Meeting with Tesla board at 10 a.m. Don't forget. Big decisions ahead." Elon stared at the message for a moment, then let out a slow breath. The work was never over, was it? He had won the trial, but now he had to prove he was more than just a fighter. He had to show the world the true value of his vision. By 10 a.m., Elon was in the Tesla boardroom. The conference table, a sleek and modern piece of design, stood at the center of the room. The walls were adorned with images of Tesla's most innovative moments: the first fully electric car, the first Falcon Heavy launch, the unveiling of the Cybertruck. Each picture was a symbol of the company's ambition, a reminder of how far they had come. But it also spoke to how much further they had yet to go. The room was filled with Tesla's top executives, all of them looking to Elon for guidance. Some were excited, others nervous, but all were focused on the future. Elon walked to the head of the table, his mind still racing, but his demeanor calm. "All right, everyone," Elon began, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "We've got a lot on our plate. The trial is over, and now we need to focus on the next phase. Tesla's future. One of the board members, Clara, an executive in charge of Tesla's sustainability initiatives, spoke up. We've made incredible progress, Elon, but there are still challenges ahead. We need to accelerate production, especially in the international markets. If we want to dominate in China, we need to increase production capacity, and fast. Elon nodded, his eyes narrowing in thought. Clara was right, of course. Tesla's global expansion was a critical next step. The demand for electric vehicles, EVs, was rising, but so were the competitive pressures. China, in particular, was a battleground where Tesla couldn't afford to lose ground. China is key, Elon said, tapping his fingers against the table. We're going to ramp up production there, but we'll also need to focus on local supply chains. The goal is to make the best EVs in the world, at the best price point. But we're not just building cars, we're building a sustainable future. The room nodded in agreement. Elon's words always had that effect. His vision wasn't just about profit, it was about the bigger picture, about reshaping industries and making a lasting impact on the planet. But there was another issue on the table, one that had been eating at Elon for some time. The Cybertruck. The bold design of the electric pickup truck had polarized opinions when it was first unveiled. Some people loved it, while others mocked it. But despite the critics, the Cybertruck had a massive following, and the pre-orders were through the roof. The challenge was in scaling up production to meet that demand. Cybertruck, Elon said, breaking the silence. It's time to take it to the next level. We're getting the first batch of prototypes out soon, but we need to look beyond that. How are we handling the manufacturing logistics for such a radical design? James, Tesla's head of manufacturing, responded, we've already started retooling the factory. It's a challenge, given the unique production methods we'll need, but we're on track. The first units should roll off the line by the end of the year. Elon smiled faintly. It wasn't just about making a bold statement with the Cybertruck, it was about proving that Tesla could disrupt entire industries. If they could successfully produce an electric pickup truck that appealed to the masses, it would change the landscape of the automotive market forever. Later that afternoon, after a full day of meetings, Elon drove to the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne. The world of rockets and space exploration was always a welcome distraction from the constant pressures of his other ventures. SpaceX was more than just a company, it was his legacy. It was his way of ensuring that humanity had a future beyond Earth, a backup plan if things went awry on the home planet. As he entered the control room, the buzz of activity was immediately noticeable. Engineers and technicians were busy at their stations, preparing for the next launch, a mission that would carry the next batch of Starlink satellites into orbit. Elon's eyes scanned the room, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a surge of excitement. SpaceX was on the verge of achieving something incredible. I want to see the plans for the Mars mission, Elon said, his tone firm. One of the senior engineers, Rebecca, looked up from her station, a little taken aback by the sudden change in focus. The Mars mission? We've got a lot on our plate with Starship right now, Elon. It's a huge project. Elon's expression softened, but his resolve remained. We can do both. We have to do both. Mars isn't just a dream anymore, it's becoming a necessity. We need to start building the infrastructure for human life on Mars. Starship is just the beginning. We need to think about food, energy, habitats, and everything in between. It's going to take time, but we need to get the ball rolling now. Rebecca nodded. Understood. We'll start working on the preliminary designs for Mars infrastructure. Elon turned to leave the control room but paused before stepping out. Remember, guys, we're not just shooting for the stars. We're building a future for humanity. This is bigger than us. The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. Elon didn't just talk about the future, he made it happen. That evening, as Elon sat in his private office, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The legal battle had taken more out of him than he cared to admit. But it had also been a reminder. A reminder that no matter how big the challenges, no matter how fierce the opposition, he had a responsibility to keep going. His phone buzzed again. It was another message from Peter. "You've done it, Elon. But the world is still waiting to see what comes next." Elon leaned back in his chair and smiled. The world wasn't ready for what he had planned, but that was fine. They would be. In the meantime, he had a mission to accomplish, and the work wasn't going to stop. As the weeks passed, the ripple effect of the trial continued to be felt across the business world. Elon's legal victory had sparked a renewed sense of possibility among entrepreneurs and innovators. The message was clear: ambition and vision could overcome even the toughest challenges. And despite his controversies, Elon's ability to weather the storm only made him more of an enigma in the eyes of the public. The media had shifted from questioning his every move to focusing on the massive potential of his projects. Tesla's stock prices surged again, SpaceX's launches gained global attention, and Neuralink's developments in brain-machine interface technology captivated the scientific community. But Elon knew that success was never guaranteed. He'd had his fair share of failures and missteps. And as always, he was determined to push forward. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon Musk had never been one to rest on his laurels. His mind was always working, always planning for what was next. But as the weeks passed since the trial, something in him had shifted. It wasn't just about achieving success anymore, it was about leaving a lasting legacy. The media's constant fascination with his every move, the court case, the victories, all of it seemed trivial now compared to the bigger mission at hand. Humanity's future beyond Earth. Sitting in his office, Elon glanced at the model of the Mars base that sat on the corner of his desk. It was a small-scale model, simple yet powerful, representing something that might be built in the decades ahead. A permanent human settlement on Mars. It was a reminder of everything he had set out to achieve. His phone buzzed on the desk. Another message from Sarah. "Elon, the Tesla team needs you in a meeting. They're pushing for a breakthrough in battery technology, and they want your input." Elon sighed. The relentless pace of innovation at Tesla was both exhilarating and exhausting. But he understood the importance. Battery technology wasn't just about electric cars, it was about sustainable energy, and that meant everything. He texted back. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. The Tesla boardroom was already bustling when Elon arrived. Engineers and executives were gathered around, papers and tablets strewn across the sleek table. Clara, Tesla's head of sustainability, was at the front, detailing the latest developments. "All right, everyone," Clara said, glancing up from her presentation. "We're on the verge of something huge. We're testing new battery chemistries that could significantly lower costs and increase energy density. If we pull this off, it could change the game, not just for electric vehicles, but for grid-scale energy storage." Elon sat down, intrigued. This was it, the next leap forward in making the world's energy grid completely sustainable. This was the key to Tesla's ultimate goal, a world run entirely on renewable energy. "So, what's the catch?" Elon asked, his voice sharp, always looking for the risks behind the rewards. "We're running into some technical hurdles," Clara replied. "The process is more expensive than we anticipated, and we need to scale up production. But the potential is immense." Elon tapped his fingers on the table, deep in thought. "Let's cut to the chase. How do we make this work?" He turned to the rest of the room. "What do we need to change? What do we need to innovate, and how do we do it faster?" One of the engineers, Raj, spoke up. "We've been looking into new production techniques and material sourcing. If we can streamline the process, it could bring down costs. We also need to ramp up our research in solid-state batteries." Solid-state batteries. Elon's mind immediately started working. The benefits were obvious: better performance, higher energy density, and greater safety. But it was still a long road to mass production. "All right," Elon said, standing up. "This is where we make our mark. Tesla isn't just a car company. We're an energy company. This isn't just about cars, it's about the future of energy storage. We need to get aggressive on this front, and I mean now." The room fell silent. Elon's energy was contagious. Clara looked at him, her eyes alight with determination. "We'll start reworking the strategy immediately. I think we can make this work." As the meeting at Tesla wrapped up, Elon shifted gears and headed straight for SpaceX. The day was already slipping away, but there was no time to waste. The future of humanity on Mars was still years away, but every day spent building and testing rockets brought them one step closer to turning that dream into reality. Walking into the SpaceX control room felt like home to him. The energy in the air was palpable, every person in the room laser-focused on the task at hand. He stood at the back, watching as engineers made final adjustments to the Starship prototype that would soon make its first uncrewed test flight to orbit. As always, there were hurdles to overcome. Space exploration was not for the faint-hearted, and SpaceX's ambitions were the stuff of science fiction. Elon's eyes scanned the various displays, tracking the countdown for the next test. A few engineers in the room looked up as he entered, giving him nods of recognition. "What's the status?" Elon asked, his voice low, the intensity of his focus coming through. Rebecca, the senior engineer overseeing Starship development, looked up from the screen, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the monitors. "We're ready to begin. There are a few final checks to be made, but we're on track. If this test goes well, we're one step closer to launching our first crewed mission." Elon nodded. He had always believed that the first manned mission to Mars was not just a milestone for SpaceX, but a necessary step for humanity. There were still technical challenges to address, but the vision was clear: people needed to live on Mars. "How soon until we have a concrete timeline for the first crewed flight?" Elon asked, his voice unwavering. "We're looking at 5 years," Rebecca replied, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice. "That could shift depending on the results of these tests." Elon didn't flinch. 5 years was nothing when it came to the scale of what they were trying to achieve. It was a marathon, not a sprint. He had seen setbacks before, and he would see them again. The key was never giving up. "That's fine," Elon said. 5 years means we have time. Time to perfect the systems, time to make sure we're ready. We're not here to rush, we're here to make sure we're building the infrastructure for a future that will last. After the meeting, Elon stayed behind for a moment, reflecting on what had just been discussed. The task before him, to make human life sustainable on Mars, seemed almost insurmountable at times. But when he looked at the people around him, people who shared his vision, his drive to do something extraordinary, it didn't feel impossible. He wasn't just building rockets and cars. He wasn't just launching satellites or improving battery technology. He was building the foundation for the next era of humanity. The world's reliance on fossil fuels was slowly coming to an end, but a much bigger shift was needed. Tesla and SpaceX were part of that shift, but there was something even more profound at play here: a chance for humanity to take its first steps toward becoming a multiplanetary species. As he sat in the quiet of the SpaceX control room, Elon thought about his legacy. He wasn't concerned with being remembered for just his successes. He knew there would be failures along the way, there always were. What mattered to him was the impact his work would have on the future. Elon had always been driven by a desire to change the world, to leave it better than he found it. But now, he understood something deeper: his true legacy wouldn't be the cars he built or the rockets that reached space. His legacy would be humanity's first steps beyond Earth. And that, he thought, was worth every ounce of effort. The morning air was crisp as Elon Musk walked into the Tesla headquarters in Palo Alto. The world outside was moving at a dizzying pace, but for him, time always seemed to move differently, faster, yet somehow more deliberate. Every minute counted when it came to changing the course of history. And that's exactly what he intended to do. As he stepped into the lobby, he was met by Sarah, his chief communications officer. She looked sharp, as always, but there was something different in her eyes today, something that hinted at an urgent development. "Elon," she said, her voice a mix of professionalism and concern. "We've got a situation with the media. There's a leak, and it's going to hit soon." Elon's brow furrowed. "A leak? About what?" Sarah handed him a tablet, and he skimmed the contents quickly. It was a story about Tesla's autonomous driving technology, specifically, an alleged accident involving a Tesla car operating on autopilot that had resulted in a serious crash. The details were vague, but the headline was enough to send a shock through the entire company. "This is bad," Sarah continued. "The timing is terrible. We've just launched the new line of vehicles, and now this. The press is going to blow this out of proportion." Elon took a deep breath, his mind already working through a dozen possible responses. The media had always had a complicated relationship with him, often sensationalizing the smallest issues. He wasn't worried about the facts, they were solid. Tesla's autopilot had saved countless lives, and accidents were inevitable in any system this complex. But the way the media would spin this was another matter. "We need to get ahead of this," Elon said, his voice steady but firm. "I want a statement ready. But we won't just respond to this. We'll take it to them, on our terms. Show them why our technology is still the safest option out there." As Sarah moved to prepare the team, Elon stood by the window, looking out at the campus. The world was watching. His every move was being scrutinized, dissected. But that was the price of ambition. He wasn't going to let this setback derail the mission. Later that afternoon, Elon stood at the front of a packed press room at Tesla's headquarters. The reporters filled the room, cameras trained on him, their questions poised like arrows. Elon had faced tough situations before, but this one felt different. This wasn't about the success of a product, it was about trust. And trust, once lost, was difficult to regain. He cleared his throat and began. "Thank you all for being here today. I know there's been a lot of speculation in the press about a recent incident involving one of our vehicles. I want to address that head-on. First and foremost, our thoughts are with the driver and their family. Tesla takes every incident like this very seriously." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "However, I also want to make one thing crystal clear: the safety of our customers is, and always has been, our top priority. Our autopilot system has saved lives. This incident, like all incidents, will be thoroughly investigated. But I want to remind everyone, no system is perfect. Human error is still the leading cause of accidents on the road. And that's why we continue to innovate, to make our cars smarter, safer, and more reliable every single day." The room was silent for a moment as reporters processed his words. Elon knew that his transparency would buy him time, but he also knew the media would keep pushing for more. "I'll take a few questions," he added, as cameras flashed. A reporter in the front row raised their hand. "Mr. Musk, Tesla has always touted its autonomy technology as revolutionary. How do you respond to critics who say this incident shows that the technology isn't ready for widespread use?" Elon's gaze didn't falter. "Autonomous driving is the future, and we're not backing down from that. Every technological leap comes with growing pains. But we're committed to learning from every single experience and improving. We've made incredible progress with autopilot, and we're still in the early stages. We're going to keep pushing forward, because that's how we improve." The questions came fast after that. Some were skeptical, others seemed sympathetic, but Elon remained calm, measured, and unwavering. He knew that the trial had prepared him for moments like this. He'd learned how to control the narrative, how to use his words as a shield while his team worked to ensure the facts were on their side. As the press conference ended and the crowd slowly dispersed, Elon's mind shifted gears once again. The media frenzy over the incident would blow over, but the pressure to innovate, to stay ahead of the curve, never stopped. Tesla wasn't just competing with other car companies, it was competing with the future itself. In his office, Elon met with his engineering team to discuss the next phase of innovation. They had a new battery chemistry on the horizon, one that could revolutionize the electric car market by reducing costs and increasing efficiency. But that was just the beginning. We need to think bigger, Elon said to the team. Our vision for the future isn't just about electric cars. It's about sustainable energy. We need to look at energy storage, solar, and even transportation beyond just cars. We can't afford to think small anymore. Raj, one of Tesla's top engineers, nodded. We're already working on expanding our battery capabilities for grid storage. The goal is to make renewable energy available anytime, anywhere. Elon leaned forward. Good. But we need to accelerate. Energy storage will change the game, and we need to be at the forefront of that change. We're building an ecosystem, not just a product. Every piece of this puzzle needs to work together: cars, energy storage, solar, everything. Clara, who had been listening closely, added, we also need to focus on infrastructure. Charging stations. We need to make it as easy as possible for people to adopt electric vehicles. Elon smiled. Exactly. We're not just selling cars, we're building the future. And we're going to make it happen faster than anyone thought possible. As the team continued discussing the next steps, Elon took a moment to think about the broader picture. The media storm was one of many he'd face in his career, but it was always a reminder that the road to innovation wasn't easy. Every step forward felt like a battle, and each victory came at a cost. But that cost, whether it was the strain on his personal life, the never-ending public scrutiny, or the sacrifices made by his teams, was worth it. The future he was building was bigger than any setback. The world needed bold thinkers, people willing to push beyond the limits of what was thought possible. He was that person, and so were the people working alongside him. Elon sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the desk. The road ahead was long, but it was one he was determined to travel. For the world, for the future, and for the generations to come. The days following the press conference were tense. Tesla's stock had taken a hit, and the media circus around the autopilot incident seemed relentless. But in true Elon Musk fashion, he didn't allow the distraction to pull him off course. He had far more pressing matters at hand, matters that could reshape the future of humanity. Elon's phone buzzed as he walked out of a meeting at SpaceX. It was Sarah, and her message was short but urgent. The SEC wants another meeting. This time, they're pushing for more serious actions regarding Tesla's statements. Elon sighed. He had been expecting this. The Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, had been investigating him and Tesla for years, ever since his infamous, funding secured, tweet. This was nothing new, but it was always a headache. He typed back quickly, let's meet tomorrow morning. No need to worry. But even as he typed those words, Elon knew that the SEC investigation wasn't something he could simply brush off. The pressure from regulators was building, and while he had a history of pushing back against authority, this time it was different. The stakes were higher than ever. The following morning, Elon was sitting in a conference room with his legal team. Lawyers in crisp suits surrounded him, all looking over piles of documents as they prepared for the meeting with the SEC. His attorney, Elizabeth, was the first to speak. We need to come up with a clear strategy for this meeting, Elon. The SEC is angry about the way Tesla's communications have been handled, especially in light of the recent media storm. They want answers. We have to be prepared for anything. Elon leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers together thoughtfully. He wasn't someone who typically feared authority, but he knew this would be different. The pressure was mounting from all sides, Tesla's investors, regulators, and even from within the company, where some executives were beginning to question his every move. "I'm not going to apologize for being direct," Elon said finally, his voice calm but firm. "I'll make my case to them. I don't want to get bogged down by details. We need to show them that we're moving forward, not backward. We have a mission to accomplish, and I'm not stopping." Elizabeth nodded. "We're on the same page. But remember, this isn't about winning the public relations war. It's about keeping Tesla on track while we face these regulatory hurdles." Elon's mind raced, thinking about his next moves. He had always used the courts, the media, and any other force at his disposal to protect his vision. But now, with Tesla at a critical juncture, he knew he had to be more calculated than ever before. "What do you think their next step will be?" Elon asked. Elizabeth frowned. "They'll likely push for more oversight of Tesla's communications. They'll probably impose additional fines, too. But more importantly, they'll want you to agree to a settlement, something to close the issue once and for all." Elon stared at the floor for a moment, considering the weight of her words. "We're not settling. We're not just a car company. This is bigger than that. I won't let them slow us down." He could feel the weight of the moment. He wasn't just fighting for his company, he was fighting for the future he envisioned for humanity, a future powered by sustainable energy, and a future where humans could venture beyond Earth. That was more important than any fine or regulatory challenge. The following afternoon, Elon and his legal team sat across from the SEC representatives in a sterile, bright conference room. The regulators were composed, poised for action, but Elon wasn't intimidated. He had been in far more difficult situations before. The lead SEC investigator, Robert Higgins, cleared his throat. "Mr. Musk, as you know, the Commission has concerns regarding the accuracy and transparency of Tesla's public communications. We're still investigating the statements made in your social media posts, and we need to ensure that future statements align with the regulatory framework for public companies." Elon didn't flinch. He met Robert's gaze directly. "I've always been transparent with the public," he said calmly. "I've always communicated in a way that reflects the ambition and vision behind Tesla. If you have concerns about specifics, I'm more than happy to address them. But I will not change my approach. Tesla's mission will not be constrained by the expectations of the status quo." Higgins looked at him, clearly taken aback. "Mr. Musk, you have to understand that your words have consequences. Tesla is a publicly traded company. There are rules, and there are consequences when those rules are not followed." Elon leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "I understand the importance of regulations. I do. But the reality is, if Tesla is to lead in the way we are, we have to challenge conventions. If we stop pushing the boundaries, we will never get to the future we're all trying to build. We will never make meaningful progress on issues like climate change, sustainable energy, and human space exploration. We cannot afford to be bogged down by rules that were made in the past." The room fell silent. Elon's words hung in the air, charged with the intensity of his conviction. It wasn't about breaking the rules for the sake of rebellion, it was about vision. It was about seeing the future clearly and taking bold steps to make it real. Robert Higgins shuffled some papers in front of him. "We understand your point, Mr. Musk. But we're here to ensure that Tesla's communications are clear, accurate, and aligned with public expectations." "I agree," Elon said. "And I'll work with you to ensure that. But the core of Tesla's mission won't change. We'll keep pushing. We'll keep innovating. And we will not stop for anyone." The tension in the room was palpable, but Elon held firm. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. When the meeting ended, Elon walked out of the SEC's offices with his legal team. The tension that had gripped him throughout the meeting hadn't dissipated, but something had shifted. He knew that he'd made his point. The regulators understood his stance, even if they didn't fully agree with it. They knew he wasn't someone who would easily be pushed around. As he stepped into his car, he took a deep breath. The next phase of his journey was already underway. He didn't have time to dwell on the SEC or media controversy. Tesla and SpaceX were still moving forward, still on track to change the world. And as he glanced out the window at the city skyline, a thought crossed his mind: what if we really are building the future? What if everything we're doing right now is just the beginning? The weight of that thought wasn't heavy, it was exhilarating. The road ahead would be difficult, but Elon Musk had never been one to shy away from challenges. He had a mission, a vision, and he would not let anything stand in his way. Elon sat in his office late that night, staring at the digital display of the SpaceX mission timeline. The upcoming Mars mission was drawing closer, and the pressure to make it successful was mounting. But as the clock ticked past midnight, his phone buzzed, drawing his attention away from the glowing screen. It was a text from an unexpected source: "We need to talk. It's urgent." The message was from a former rival, Jeff Bezos. Elon raised an eyebrow. The rivalry between SpaceX and Blue Origin had been well documented, with both companies vying for supremacy in the race to dominate space exploration. Bezos, the founder of Amazon and Blue Origin, was known for his deep pockets and relentless ambition. But despite their competition, Elon knew that Jeff had a sharp mind and a formidable business acumen. If Jeff wanted to talk, it wasn't a casual invitation. He quickly typed back, "What's on your mind?" A few minutes later, Jeff's response came, "Meet me at the usual place. 8 a.m. tomorrow. I'll explain everything." Elon leaned back in his chair, pondering the mysterious nature of the meeting. It had been years since he and Jeff had shared a meaningful conversation, and their rivalry had only grown more intense. The fact that Jeff was reaching out now, under such mysterious circumstances, was enough to pique his curiosity. The next morning, Elon arrived at the private airport hangar where he and Jeff had met in the past. The space was as high-tech and sterile as one would expect from two men who had revolutionized the tech and space industries. Jeff was already there, standing by the window, gazing out at the runway as if contemplating the future. Elon walked up to him and extended a hand. "Jeff." Jeff shook his hand firmly. "Elon. Thanks for coming. What's going on?" Elon asked, cutting straight to the chase. "You said it was urgent." Jeff turned to face him, his expression unusually serious. "You know how we've always been competitors, right?" He paused, gauging Elon's reaction. "I think we're about to face something bigger than our rivalry. Something we both need to deal with. Together." Elon furrowed his brow. "What are you talking about?" "There's a real threat coming," Jeff said. "A new player in the space industry, someone with more resources, more influence, and more ambition than either of us. Someone who could change the game forever." Elon's mind immediately went into overdrive. There were always new players trying to enter the space race, but Jeff's urgency made it clear that this was something different. "Who is it?" Elon asked. "A consortium of international companies," Jeff replied. "They've pooled together a massive amount of resources, and they've got plans that go far beyond space exploration. They want to build a new, global infrastructure, one that could bypass anything we've been working on." Elon's curiosity was now fully piqued. "How serious is this?" "Serious enough that we're both going to need to pivot," Jeff said. "They've been quietly consolidating power in a way that neither SpaceX nor Blue Origin has anticipated. They're not just after space contracts. They're after domination of the entire space economy." Elon didn't immediately respond. The room felt tense, the weight of the situation sinking in. He had spent years focusing on SpaceX's future, on humanity's future in space. But the idea of a new threat, one with the resources to undermine everything he had built, was unsettling. What's their endgame? Elon asked. They want to control the entire orbital infrastructure, Jeff explained. Satellites, resources on the moon, space stations. Everything. And if they succeed, they'll have the power to shape the future of space exploration for decades to come. Elon ran a hand through his hair, thinking quickly. This was bigger than any rivalry. This was about the future of humanity's exploration of space, and everything he and Jeff had worked for could be jeopardized. So, what do you want from me? Elon asked, his voice sharp. I want us to join forces, Jeff said bluntly. The only way we can compete with this new threat is by combining our resources and expertise. Together, we can build the infrastructure that will keep us in control. Separately, we'll be outmatched. Elon was taken aback. A partnership with Jeff Bezos? The thought was unappealing, to say the least. But the logic behind it was undeniable. Alone, they were strong, but together, they could be unstoppable. Still, the idea of working with a rival, someone who had often been critical of him, left a bad taste in his mouth. This is crazy, Elon muttered. We've spent years trying to outdo each other. Now you want us to team up? I wouldn't be asking if it wasn't necessary, Jeff said. This isn't just about us. It's about the future of space, the future of humanity. We have to put our differences aside, at least for now. There was a long pause as Elon processed Jeff's words. The future of space exploration, his ultimate goal of making humanity a multiplanetary species, was at stake. His mission had always been to push the boundaries of what was possible, to do things others thought were impossible. Was he really going to let ego and rivalry stand in the way of this? Finally, he spoke. All right. Let's do it. But this isn't a merger of equals, Jeff. I'm not giving up on SpaceX's vision. This is a partnership of necessity, not convenience. Jeff nodded, clearly relieved. Understood. We'll keep our companies separate, but we'll work together where it counts. I'll start setting up the meetings with the key players. As they shook hands, Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Teaming up with Jeff wasn't something he had ever imagined, but the circumstances were dire. Space exploration was a massive, high-stakes game, and if they didn't adapt quickly, they would both be left behind. Back at Tesla's headquarters, Elon couldn't shake the conversation from his mind. The idea of combining forces with Jeff was monumental, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he had little choice. The new threat was too powerful to ignore. But his commitment to Tesla's mission and his vision for a sustainable future didn't change. Whatever happened next, he would continue to push forward with everything he had. SpaceX, Tesla, and the future of humanity, they all depended on him, and he wouldn't let that future slip through his fingers. As Elon left his office that evening, he looked up at the stars. They were as beautiful and mysterious as ever. The path to the stars had always been fraught with challenges, but that was never a reason to stop. He had a vision, and he would do whatever it took to make it a reality. Even if that meant teaming up with an unlikely ally. The partnership between Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos sent shockwaves through the space industry. It was a bold move, one that would have been unthinkable just a few months ago. The media couldn't stop talking about it, headlines screamed about the Musk-Bezos alliance, and what it could mean for the future of space exploration. But beneath the surface, Elon knew that this partnership would not be without its challenges. There was too much history, too much rivalry between him and Jeff. They had built their respective companies on competing visions, and now, they were being forced to reconcile those differences for the sake of something greater. As Elon sat in his office at Tesla's headquarters, he looked over the documents detailing the next steps for the combined efforts between SpaceX and Blue Origin. His legal team had already started to draft the framework for their partnership, which would include shared research, joint missions, and the pooling of resources to build a new orbital infrastructure that could compete with the growing international consortium. But even as the logistics of their alliance were being hammered out, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His mind kept circling back to one central question: what if this wasn't enough? What if the new players in space were just too powerful to be stopped? His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. He looked up to see Elizabeth, his lead attorney, standing in the doorway. She had a look on her face that suggested she had bad news. "What's going on?" Elon asked. "We've got a new development," Elizabeth said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. "The SEC is calling another hearing. They're not happy with the way we've handled Tesla's communications. They want answers, and this time, they're asking for something more than just a fine." Elon's shoulders slumped, the weight of the ongoing legal battles pressing down on him. The SEC had already imposed sanctions, and despite his best efforts to push forward with Tesla's goals, the agency seemed determined to slow him down at every turn. The idea of facing them again was frustrating, but there was no way around it. "When is it?" Elon asked, trying to stay calm. "It's in 3 days," Elizabeth replied. "They want a full explanation of your tweets, the communications surrounding the recent autopilot incidents, and your statements on the company's financial outlook. This is serious, Elon. They're pushing for something that could go beyond just a fine, potentially a settlement that could restrict your ability to lead Tesla." Elon clenched his fists. The thought of losing his ability to lead Tesla was unacceptable. He had built this company from the ground up, and no regulator was going to take that away from him. "I'm not going to let them control the narrative," Elon said firmly, his eyes blazing with determination. "We'll show them the truth. We'll show them the future we're building, one that will change the world. And if they don't see that, they can't stop us." Elizabeth didn't respond immediately, sensing the tension in the air. "You have a point," she said. "But we need to be careful. They've got a lot of power, and they're not going to back down easily. We need to approach this strategically." Elon nodded. "We'll do it my way. Prepare the legal team for a fight." Over the next few days, Elon spent hours preparing for the SEC hearing. He met with his legal team, strategizing their approach. The SEC was going to demand answers, but Elon wasn't about to sit back and apologize. He knew that if he was going to maintain his position, he needed to prove that Tesla was on the cutting edge of technology and innovation, no matter what. He was determined to show the SEC that Tesla's mission was about more than just profits and quarterly reports. It was about making the world a better place. It was about a vision for the future, one where sustainable energy powered the world and humans were living on multiple planets. As Elon pored over documents, legal briefs, and strategy plans, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was from Jeff Bezos. "Elon, we need to talk. Urgent." Elon frowned, wondering what could be so urgent after their recent discussion. He quickly texted back, "What's going on?" A few minutes later, Jeff's reply came through, "There's something we didn't foresee. The international consortium has moved faster than we thought. They've made a strategic alliance with a major tech giant, someone with enormous influence. They're about to make a massive move, and we need to be prepared." Elon's heart skipped a beat. Whoever they were up against, it was clear that the stakes were higher than ever. He had been worried about the new space competitors, but this was different. Now, they had a formidable partner, someone with the resources and the power to shift the balance of power in the space race. "We can't afford to lose," Elon texted back. "We need to move fast." "What's their next move?" "They're launching a series of high-profile missions," Jeff responded. "They're aiming to establish a permanent presence on the moon by the end of the year. If we don't act now, they'll control the key resources on the moon, and it'll be nearly impossible to catch up." Elon gritted his teeth. The race to the moon had always been a part of SpaceX's long-term goals, but now it was a race for survival. Whoever controlled the moon's resources controlled the future. "I'll get the teams working on it," Elon replied. "We're not going to lose this." The day of the SEC hearing arrived. Elon entered the courtroom, flanked by his legal team. The tension was palpable. The SEC had already made it clear that they weren't going to let him off the hook easily. But Elon wasn't going to back down. He had a point to prove. The room was filled with regulators, lawyers, and journalists, all eager to see how Elon would handle the pressure. He could feel their eyes on him as he sat down at the table. The SEC representatives, led by Robert Higgins, were ready for a battle. "We're here today to discuss Tesla's communications, Mr. Musk," Higgins began. "Specifically, your public statements about the company's financial health, the autopilot incidents, and your use of social media. We're concerned about the impact your statements have had on investors and the market." Elon looked straight at Higgins, his voice steady and unwavering. "Tesla is not just a company. It's a movement. We're not here to follow the status quo. We're here to push the boundaries of what's possible. If that makes some people uncomfortable, that's not my problem." The room fell silent. Elon's words were bold, and his conviction was clear. He wasn't just defending his company, he was defending his vision for the future. The SEC hearing would be a battle, but it was one Elon was ready to fight. He had faced adversity before, and he would face it again. His mission was too important to let anyone, not even the regulators, stand in his way. The SEC hearing was a battleground, but Elon Musk had become a seasoned warrior in the legal world. The opening rounds had been brutal, with the SEC aggressively questioning Tesla's communications, including Elon's infamous tweets and the company's handling of recent autopilot incidents. But Elon, as always, remained unflappable. "Mr. Musk," Robert Higgins, the lead SEC investigator, said, his voice stern. "Your public statements have caused market instability. Investors are relying on clear and accurate information, and your behavior seems to undermine that." Elon leaned forward, his face a mask of determination. "The truth is, we are building a future that is unlike anything the world has seen before. Tesla isn't just another company. We're creating the future of transportation, sustainable energy, and space exploration. People who want to invest in that future need to understand that it's not a conventional path. If you want safety and predictability, you might want to look elsewhere." There was a ripple in the room. Journalists scribbled down his words. It was a bold statement, one that put the entire mission of Tesla on display for everyone to see. Elon's confidence was contagious, and for a brief moment, the courtroom seemed to breathe in sync with him. "I understand the concern," he continued, his voice steady but piercing. "But if we were to wait for everything to be perfect, we'd never move forward. Change takes risks. We've always been upfront about that." Higgins frowned, clearly dissatisfied. "But Mr. Musk, we're not talking about just any risk. We're talking about public safety, about lives being potentially put at risk due to your autopilot systems. And as for your tweets, they've had a very real impact on your stock price and the market at large." Elon didn't flinch. "Tesla is transforming the auto industry. It's never been done before, and we're not going to follow the rules that everyone else is following. If you want Tesla to stay within a box, I suggest you look at another company. But if you want us to change the world, you have to allow us the space to take risks." As he spoke, his mind wandered for just a moment to the meeting with Jeff Bezos. The threats were mounting on every side, from the SEC to the international consortium in space. The road ahead was fraught with obstacles, but he was used to fighting against the tide. Suddenly, a sharp ping cut through his thoughts. It was a message from Jeff. "We've got a problem. They've accelerated their timeline. They're targeting the moon's resources sooner than we thought. We need to push forward with our lunar plans, now." Elon quickly typed a response, "Understood. I'm in the middle of a hearing, but we'll get the teams on it." He put his phone back in his pocket, but the urgency of the message lingered. The race for the moon had just become a sprint. Back in the hearing room, the back and forth continued, but Elon was no longer just defending Tesla. This had become a battle for his vision, not just for a company, but for the future of humanity. Higgins continued to press. You cannot simply make reckless statements and expect to face no consequences, Mr. Musk. If you continue to disregard the rules and mislead investors, we will take further action. Elon knew this moment was pivotal. If he faltered, the entire future of Tesla could be jeopardized. But if he stood firm and made his case convincingly, he might be able to turn this legal fight into a victory, one that would strengthen Tesla's position in the industry. I don't make reckless statements, Elon said, his voice cutting through the tension. I make bold statements because the future is bold. We're not trying to preserve the status quo, Mr. Higgins. We're building something revolutionary, and that requires thinking outside the box. If you want safety and predictability, I suggest you go look at the other car companies, because Tesla isn't for those who want the world to stay the same. The room was still. The force of his words hung in the air. Robert Higgins narrowed his eyes, as if searching for a weakness. But Elon knew he had nothing to hide. Tesla's future, its mission, and its vision were all on the table, and he wasn't about to back down. This was bigger than just a hearing. This was about proving that they weren't just creating electric cars, they were creating the future. Just as the tension in the room reached its peak, a familiar voice broke the silence. Mr. Musk is right, said an unexpected figure. It was Judge Ramirez, the judge overseeing the case, who had been quietly observing the proceedings. This isn't about a single statement or tweet. It's about a larger vision for the future. And whether you like it or not, that vision is what's driving innovation and progress. If you punish Tesla for pushing boundaries, then you might as well punish every innovator in history who dared to change the world. The room was stunned. The judge had sided with Elon in a way no one had expected. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a huge turn in his favor. Higgins was visibly frustrated, but there was little he could do. The tone had shifted, and it was clear that this hearing wasn't going to follow the traditional legal script. Judge Ramirez continued, however, I will not overlook the need for accountability. Tesla must adhere to certain standards, particularly concerning safety. This court will give you time to address these concerns, but you must demonstrate a commitment to transparency and responsible corporate behavior. Elon nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. We will comply with all safety standards and continue to push forward with our mission. We are not perfect, but we will never stop innovating. The judge looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. I expect to see that commitment in action. This case will be adjourned, and we will reconvene at a later date. As the hearing wrapped up, Elon felt a sense of relief wash over him. He had faced down the SEC, and while the battle wasn't over, he had made a crucial point. His vision for Tesla, and for humanity's future, was not something he was willing to compromise. Back at SpaceX headquarters, Elon's mind was already racing ahead to the next battle, the moon. Jeff's message had hit him hard. The competition wasn't waiting for him to finish his legal struggles. They were moving forward, and if SpaceX didn't act fast, they would lose their advantage in the race to control lunar resources. Elon called an emergency meeting with his top engineers and space strategists. We need to accelerate the timeline for our lunar program, he said, his voice full of urgency. I don't care what it takes. We're not letting anyone else control the moon. The room buzzed with energy as the team set to work. Elon's focus had shifted once again, this time, to the stars. The future of humanity depended on it. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity for Elon Musk. The SEC hearing had not only been a personal victory but had also served to fuel his determination. Tesla's battle with the regulators was far from over, but it had become just one of many fires he needed to manage. At the same time, the stakes of the race to the moon grew more intense with each passing day. Elon stood in the heart of SpaceX's mission control, staring at the massive screens that dominated the room. Each screen displayed real-time data, tracking the progress of their various spacecraft. But his mind wasn't focused on the usual test flights or satellite launches. It was on the moon, and the competition that had suddenly become a real threat. "Elon, we've got a breakthrough," said Gwynne Shotwell, the president of SpaceX, as she walked into the control room, holding a tablet in her hand. "The team has found a way to cut the cost of the lunar landing by 25%. It's the game changer we've been waiting for." Elon looked up from the screens, his eyes narrowing with focus. "That's exactly what we need. But we can't slow down. The competition is gaining ground faster than we thought." Gwynne nodded. "I agree. Jeff's team has been working on something too. Intelligence from our sources says they're in the final stages of preparing a lunar base plan. They're serious about this. If we don't act soon, we might be locked out of the first wave of lunar resources." Elon felt a sharp jolt of determination course through him. The moon, once a distant dream for humanity, was now the stage for the next great competition. This wasn't just about reaching the moon anymore, it was about controlling the vast resources there. Whoever established a foothold first would have the power to shape the future of space exploration, and, by extension, the future of humanity. "Tell the team to triple their efforts," Elon said, his voice resolute. "We need to be the first ones to establish a permanent presence on the moon. Not just land, settle. We're going to put the first sustainable base there, and we're going to do it fast." As Gwynne nodded and left to coordinate with the engineers, Elon stood alone, his thoughts swirling. The pressure was immense, but it was nothing new. Throughout his career, he had been used to fighting against overwhelming odds. From launching Tesla against the tide of the auto industry's giants to sending rockets to space when no one believed it was possible, Elon had always thrived when the stakes were highest. But this was different. The moon was the next frontier, and controlling it was the key to the next generation of humanity's expansion into the stars. Elon's phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a message from Jeff Bezos. "We've heard from our sources that they're planning a test launch within the next 2 months. They're not waiting for approval, they're launching without any fanfare, hoping to catch us off guard. We can't afford to sit idle." Elon clenched his jaw as he read the message. The situation had escalated quickly. Whoever they were, likely the International Space Consortium, had clearly planned for this moment for a long time. The moon was now the center of a high-stakes geopolitical game. No one could afford to sit on the sidelines. "We won't," Elon typed back. "SpaceX is moving faster. We've already reworked the lunar mission plan. Expect a launch within 6 weeks. We'll be the first to land." Jeff's reply came almost instantly. "It's more than just landing, Elon. It's about securing resources. You need to be thinking about extraction and sustainability, not just landing a flag. We can't afford to miss out on that." Elon nodded to himself. Jeff was right. This was no longer just a race to plant a flag, it was a race to stake a claim on the moon's precious resources, which could one day be used to fuel space exploration, build infrastructure, and even support life on Mars. Whoever controlled those resources would control the future. Elon's mind raced as he thought about the specifics of lunar resource extraction. The moon held untold wealth, helium-3, a potential fuel source for future fusion reactors, rare earth metals, and more. Securing these resources would give SpaceX, and humanity, an enormous advantage in the race for space dominance. Back at Tesla's headquarters, Elon had a rare moment of peace as he walked through the quiet hallways. He was always on the move, always thinking of the next challenge, but there were times when he allowed himself to pause and reflect. Today, as the weight of his moon mission continued to press on his shoulders, he found himself wondering about the long-term implications of this race. Would it unite humanity, or would it fracture the global community even further? What if the race to control lunar resources led to a new kind of space colonization, a new form of competition that transcended national borders and corporate interests? Elon had always believed in the power of innovation to solve the world's greatest challenges, but this was something different. The moon could either be the key to the future or the catalyst for even more conflict. Suddenly, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unexpected source. "Elon, it's Richard Branson," came the voice on the other end. "I've been watching your lunar plans with great interest. And, I've got a proposition for you." Elon raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. Richard Branson was known for his ambitious Virgin Galactic projects, and while they had never been direct competitors, their paths often crossed in the space industry. "What kind of proposition?" Elon asked. "I think we can help each other," Richard said. "Virgin's been working on some technology that could complement your lunar landing efforts. We have a vehicle designed for zero-gravity construction. Think of it as a way to help build lunar habitats much faster than conventional methods. It's a game-changer." Elon's interest peaked. Branson wasn't the type to offer help without expecting something in return, but this was different. A partnership with Virgin Galactic could be the key to SpaceX achieving its lunar goals faster than anyone else. "I'm listening," Elon said. Richard quickly outlined his vision. Virgin Galactic had developed a system that could accelerate the building of infrastructure on the moon. Their technology could allow for the creation of lunar bases with prefabricated modules, using materials that could be extracted from the moon's surface. It was exactly what Elon needed, someone with the right technology to support his vision. The timing was perfect. By joining forces, SpaceX and Virgin could push ahead of the competition, creating a sustainable lunar outpost that would set the stage for future missions to Mars. "We'll need to move fast," Elon said, his voice steady. "The race is on. Let's make this happen." Branson agreed, and within hours, teams from SpaceX and Virgin Galactic were working together to refine their plans for the lunar mission. The partnership would give both companies a strategic advantage, and with the looming competition, they couldn't afford to waste time. In the following weeks, SpaceX accelerated its efforts to prepare for the lunar mission. Elon watched as the teams, now bolstered by Virgin Galactic's expertise, worked day and night to refine the spacecraft, the landing systems, and the infrastructure needed to support a lunar outpost. Every detail had to be perfect. The resources on the moon were too valuable, and the window of opportunity was closing fast. SpaceX was on the brink of making history, but they needed to act before anyone else could get there first. Elon knew the risks. Every great endeavor carried them. But this was the moment he had been waiting for. The moon wasn't just a place to visit, it was the first step in humanity's journey to the stars. And with the collaboration of SpaceX and Virgin Galactic, that journey was closer than ever. The pressure was mounting with every passing day. Elon Musk stood in the heart of SpaceX's control center, his gaze fixed on the giant digital clock that ticked away relentlessly above the center's main console. The countdown to SpaceX's lunar launch was officially underway. But for Elon, time had always been a precious commodity, and now, more than ever, it felt like the enemy. "Everything is on track," Gwynne Shotwell said, walking into the room with her usual calm but focused demeanor. She handed Elon a tablet with the latest status updates. "The spacecraft is ready, the payload is set, and we've completed all pre-launch testing. The team's doing a great job." Elon looked at the tablet briefly before putting it down. "Great. But we're still behind schedule. I want to move faster. There's no time to waste. We can't let the competition get the upper hand." Gwynne nodded, understanding his urgency. The mission was more than just a standard launch, it was the beginning of an unprecedented new era. SpaceX wasn't just launching a spacecraft to the moon, they were aiming to lay the groundwork for the first sustainable human settlement beyond Earth. And they had to do it before anyone else. Just days earlier, Elon had received another message from Jeff Bezos, and the tone had been more urgent than before. "Elon, we've got intel. The International Space Consortium is accelerating their plans. They've got a different approach, one we haven't seen before. They're preparing for a full-scale lunar base in less than a year. We can't afford to lose our edge. Elon had read the message with a sense of dread, his mind immediately racing through potential strategies. He knew the competition was fierce, but this was a different level entirely. The consortium wasn't just building a lunar base, they were planning to dominate the moon, claiming the resources that would fuel future space exploration and infrastructure. Whoever controlled those resources would control the future of humanity's expansion beyond Earth. The mission had to be successful. There was no room for error. Elon spent the following days in an almost constant state of motion. He juggled meetings with engineers, strategists, and even the legal team handling Tesla's ongoing battles. But his mind was always on the moon mission. Every conversation, every decision, seemed to have some tie to this looming moment. And with each passing hour, the stakes only grew higher. At one point, as Elon stood in front of a whiteboard, explaining the final pre-launch adjustments to Gwyn and the rest of the team, the door opened, and a new face entered the room. It was a young engineer, a recent hire with an impressive background in deep space robotics. "Mr. Musk, I have something you need to see," the engineer said, his voice tinged with excitement. Elon looked up, his curiosity piqued. "Go ahead." The engineer quickly activated a nearby screen. The image displayed was a new concept for the lunar landing, one that Elon hadn't seen before. It was a detailed model of a lunar base, complete with autonomous construction bots capable of building structures using lunar soil. The robots would be able to construct habitats and other infrastructure while relying on limited resources, making it a more sustainable approach. This, the engineer said, could revolutionize the speed at which we establish a permanent base on the moon. Elon studied the model carefully, his mind racing. It was ambitious, to say the least, but it could give SpaceX the upper hand. This was what he had been waiting for, something that could completely change the game and set SpaceX apart from everyone else. If this works, we'll be able to build our base faster, cheaper, and with fewer risks to human life, the engineer added. It'll be the foundation for everything that comes after. If we succeed here, we can build anything, anywhere. Elon's eyes gleamed with excitement. This was exactly the type of breakthrough that SpaceX needed to ensure they were the first to stake a claim on the moon. He immediately gave the green light to move forward with the plan. "This is it," he said, his voice full of conviction. "We're going to change everything." The final days before the launch were a blur of activity. The SpaceX team worked tirelessly, making sure every system was in place. Elon continued to push them to work faster, harder, and smarter, but he also found time to ensure that everything was done with precision. There was no room for error. Every detail, from the spacecraft's trajectory to the lunar landing protocols, had to be perfect. In the midst of this frenzy, Elon received a call from an unexpected source, Richard Branson. The two had been in frequent contact over the past few weeks, discussing their ongoing collaboration. Branson had a knack for spotting opportunities that others overlooked, and Elon appreciated his willingness to think outside the box. "Elon, I've been thinking," Richard said, his tone thoughtful. "We're in a race to the moon, yes. But we're also building the infrastructure for a whole new space economy. And we need to make sure that we're not just competing against each other. We should be thinking about long-term sustainability. We can't afford to get locked into short-term thinking. The future of humanity is at stake." Elon sat back, absorbing Richard's words. The urgency of their race to the moon was undeniable, but Richard was right, this wasn't just about landing first. It was about building the foundation for something that would endure for centuries. A sustainable space economy. A future where humanity could not only live on other planets but thrive. "I'm with you," Elon said after a long pause. "We'll keep our focus on the bigger picture. But right now, we have to beat them to the moon. The resources up there are too important. We can't afford to let anyone else claim them first." Richard chuckled. "You're always thinking 2 steps ahead, Elon. Let's get it done. Together." The call ended, and Elon was once again alone with his thoughts. The competition was fierce, but it was clear that he wasn't in this alone. SpaceX had the technology, the team, and the vision to get to the moon first. But even as he thought about the impending launch, his mind couldn't help but wander to the larger questions. What would the future look like once they established a foothold on the moon? And how would humanity shape its destiny among the stars? As the day of the launch approached, the atmosphere at SpaceX's headquarters grew increasingly tense. The team was ready, but there was no escaping the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just another mission. This was the next step in humanity's journey beyond Earth. Elon knew that if SpaceX succeeded, they would become the frontrunners in the race to dominate space. If they failed, the consequences would be far-reaching. Elon stood in front of the control room once more, the clock ticking down to launch. It was the moment of truth. 5 minutes, Gwynne Shotwell announced, her voice steady but full of anticipation. Elon took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the launch pad in the distance. The countdown had begun. Everything they had worked for, everything they had risked, was about to come to fruition. "Let's make history," Elon said, more to himself than to anyone else in the room. As the clock hit 0, SpaceX's Falcon Heavy rocket roared to life, lifting off into the sky. Elon watched the rocket rise, a feeling of exhilaration and nervousness flooding his chest. This was it. The race to the moon had officially begun. The roar of the rocket engines faded into the distance as SpaceX's Falcon Heavy soared into the sky. Elon Musk stood in the control room, his eyes fixed on the screens, tracking the spacecraft's every move. The entire team was tense, waiting for the crucial moments that would confirm the success of the mission. In just a few short minutes, they would know whether this was the beginning of a new era in space exploration or if they had just launched the biggest gamble of their careers. Separation confirmed, the voice of the flight director came through the intercom. A wave of relief washed over the room. The rocket's boosters had successfully separated, and the spacecraft was now on its way to the moon. Elon allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. This was a huge milestone, but it was only the beginning. The real challenge still lay ahead, landing on the moon and establishing the first sustainable human presence on its surface. As the spacecraft drifted through space, the team continued monitoring its systems, making adjustments where needed. Elon's thoughts were already on the next stage of the mission. SpaceX's lunar ambitions weren't just about landing on the moon, they were about creating something that would last. The lunar base, powered by resources extracted from the moon itself, would be the first step in creating a permanent human foothold on another celestial body. But the competition had not slowed down. Despite SpaceX's lead, the International Space Consortium, along with private entities like Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson, were all preparing their own lunar missions. Elon knew that the race for lunar resources was about to become even more intense. If they didn't establish their presence soon, they could lose out on the vital resources that would power the next generation of space missions. SpaceX wasn't just competing for prestige, it was competing for the future of humanity. The spacecraft's trajectory was flawless, and the crew members on board were executing their tasks with precision. Elon's team had developed new landing protocols designed to make the lunar touchdown safer and more efficient. It wasn't just about being first to land, it was about being the first to do it sustainably. They were going to extract resources from the moon, build habitats, and pave the way for future colonization efforts on Mars. The moon was a proving ground, a critical test of what they could achieve. And Elon Musk was determined that SpaceX would not only pass the test but redefine what was possible. Back at SpaceX's headquarters, Gwynne Shotwell and the engineering team were already hard at work, preparing for the next phase of the mission. Elon's latest vision was clear: SpaceX would not just land on the moon and plant a flag, they would stay. They would build. A team of engineers gathered around a table covered with blueprints and 3D models of a lunar habitat. The blueprint was audacious, featuring modular designs capable of adapting to the harsh lunar environment. Solar panels, air filtration systems, and autonomous robots designed to harvest lunar soil would form the backbone of the base. The base would be sustainable, built to withstand the extreme temperatures and radiation of the lunar surface without constant reliance on Earth. "This has to work," Gwyn said, her voice heavy with responsibility. "If this mission succeeds, it could change everything. We could be the first company to not only land but to build a permanent settlement on the moon. But we can't afford any missteps." Elon glanced at the blueprint, his eyes scanning the details. He knew the risks. The moon had been a place of human imagination for centuries, but now it was a real challenge, a place where failure could mean disaster. A single mistake could jeopardize not only SpaceX's mission but the entire future of humanity's space endeavors. But despite the immense pressure, Elon was more determined than ever. They couldn't afford to fail. If they did, someone else would take the lead, and the opportunity for a sustainable future on the moon would slip through their fingers. "This is why we have to be the best," Elon said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "No one else has this level of ambition. We can't afford to just land. We need to set up for the long term. We're not just putting a flag on the moon, we're putting humanity's future there." As SpaceX's spacecraft neared the moon, a new set of challenges emerged. Despite all the preparation, the landing process wasn't as smooth as expected. A malfunction in the landing gear delayed the touchdown by several hours, throwing a wrench into the tight timeline they had set for the mission. Elon stood in the control room, watching the data on the screens as the engineers worked furiously to resolve the issue. His mind raced through the various scenarios. This wasn't a minor problem. If they couldn't fix it, they could risk losing everything. The entire team was on edge, and the tension in the room was palpable. "We've got it," came the voice of the lead engineer. "The systems are back online. We're on track for landing." The collective sigh of relief that followed was almost deafening. Elon's heart rate slowed, but he knew better than to let his guard down. There was still so much that could go wrong, but for the moment, SpaceX was back on course. A few hours later, the spacecraft descended toward the lunar surface, the landing gears finally in position. As the countdown to touchdown began, Elon's thoughts were focused entirely on the mission, on the decades of work that had led to this point. He had always known that failure was a possibility, but he also knew that the greater the risk, the greater the reward. As the final few meters closed, the spacecraft's thrusters kicked in, and the team's nerves were stretched thin. Then, the unthinkable happened. The spacecraft made contact with the moon's surface, smoothly, without a hitch. A cheer erupted from the control room, but Elon remained silent, watching as the confirmation came through on the screens. The first human-made spacecraft had successfully landed on the moon's surface, and with it, SpaceX had made history. It was a victory that not only marked the company's place in space history but also signaled the beginning of a new chapter for humanity. As Elon watched the team celebrate in the control room, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. It had been a long, difficult journey, one that had tested his limits in ways he hadn't always expected. But the success of this mission wasn't just about his vision, it was about the collective effort of the people who had worked tirelessly to make it happen. For a brief moment, Elon thought about the future. This mission, the first step toward establishing a sustainable presence on the moon, was only the beginning. The challenges ahead, resource extraction, habitat construction, and the eventual journey to Mars, were enormous. But SpaceX had proven that it was possible to reach for the stars. And, with the right mindset, nothing could stop them from achieving even more. In that moment, as he watched the team revel in their triumph, Elon felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had done it. They had landed on the moon. And now, they were on their way to shaping the future. But Elon knew this was just the start. As the celebrations died down and the team got to work on preparing the next phase of the mission, beginning the construction of a permanent base, Elon stood quietly in the corner of the control room, a soft smile crossing his face. There was still so much to do, so many obstacles to overcome. But for now, he allowed himself to savor the moment. The countdown had been successful. The moon was theirs. The moon's surface was now no longer a distant dream or a place of scientific curiosity. It was a tangible frontier. SpaceX's success had marked the beginning of a new era in human exploration, one where humanity's reach stretched beyond Earth and into the very fabric of space. But the real challenge had only just begun. Elon Musk stood at the forefront of this new age, his mind brimming with ideas for what the future could hold. Back at the SpaceX headquarters, Gwynne Shotwell and the rest of the team were already making plans for the next phase of the lunar mission. With the first successful landing secured, the focus now shifted to establishing the first permanent human presence on the moon. "All right," Gwynne said, addressing the engineering team in the briefing room. "The landing was a huge success, but it's the base we're building now that will define our legacy. We need to start planning for construction immediately. The robots that are going to help us are ready, and we have to make sure our systems are optimized for sustainable living." Elon entered the room, his mind still buzzing with the possibilities. The moon was only a temporary stop on a much longer journey, but it was the first domino in a sequence that would eventually lead humanity to Mars and beyond. "Right," Elon said, his voice steady but filled with excitement. "The base on the moon will serve as the proving ground for everything that comes after. Everything we learn here, how to build structures, generate energy, and support life, will be crucial for our missions to Mars. We're setting the blueprint for human life beyond Earth." It was a massive undertaking, but SpaceX had already proven they could defy expectations. And Elon was certain that the team could meet this challenge as well. As SpaceX celebrated its monumental achievement, another challenge loomed large in the background: the legal and economic framework for future space exploration. The success of the moon mission was a game-changer, but Elon knew that to establish a permanent presence on the moon and later Mars, they would need to address questions of property rights, resource mining, and interplanetary governance. These were uncharted territories, and no one had concrete answers. Elon was aware that governments around the world were already scrambling to formulate space policies that could keep pace with private companies like SpaceX. The Outer Space Treaty, which had been established in the 1960s, prohibited nations from claiming sovereignty over celestial bodies, but there were many legal gray areas that companies like SpaceX were beginning to test. Elon had always been ahead of the curve, anticipating challenges before they became problems. He knew that the legal battles surrounding space exploration would be fierce, and the next few years would be crucial in setting the stage for SpaceX's future. That's when a call came in. It was from none other than the U.S. President's office. Elon's heart rate quickened as he picked up the phone. "Mr. Musk," the voice on the other end began. "We've been following your progress closely. Your recent lunar landing is a monumental achievement. The administration would like to discuss the future of space exploration and how private companies like SpaceX will play a role in shaping that future." Elon listened carefully as the president outlined a proposal for collaboration between the government and private space companies. It was clear that they understood the gravity of the situation, and they wanted to ensure that SpaceX would be at the table when it came time to draft the laws and regulations governing space exploration. The conversation was lengthy, filled with technical discussions and policy considerations. Elon had always been somewhat skeptical of government intervention, but he knew this was one area where collaboration would be essential. The legal framework for space exploration needed to be solid, and the groundwork had to be laid before humanity could truly begin to colonize other planets. "I'm glad to hear the government is taking this seriously," Elon said at the end of the call. "Space exploration is going to require unprecedented levels of cooperation, both from the public and private sectors. I'm ready to work with you to make sure we get this right." Despite the positive conversations, tensions were beginning to rise in the international space community. SpaceX's rapid progress had caught the attention of other nations and companies. China, Russia, and the European Union were all accelerating their own space programs, and they had no intention of letting a private American company dominate space exploration. These countries were racing to develop their own lunar landing technologies and were preparing for their own missions to the moon. Elon had always expected competition, but the speed and scale at which other nations were moving surprised him. While SpaceX was forging ahead with its plans to build a sustainable base on the moon, other countries were making significant progress on their own lunar missions, some even planning to build their own permanent structures. The race was on. Elon found himself increasingly involved in diplomatic discussions, attempting to broker deals with governments and space agencies to ensure that SpaceX's projects would remain a top priority. There was talk of joint ventures, of collaborations that could potentially bring international players into the fold. But with these discussions came the complexity of politics and negotiations. At the core of it all, though, Elon knew that only the most ambitious would succeed in this new space race. As the moon base began to take shape, Elon began to turn his focus to the broader vision. He saw the moon as humanity's first step into a larger universe. But Mars was the ultimate destination. The lessons they learned on the moon would pave the way for interplanetary travel, for building habitats and societies that could survive in the harshest environments. Elon, Gwyn said, interrupting his thoughts. We're on the verge of something big. The moon is just the start. Mars is the real challenge. I know, Elon replied, a glimmer of excitement in his eyes. The moon has taught us so much already, but Mars will be the true test. If we can make life sustainable there, we will have unlocked the key to humanity's future. SpaceX's Mars program was already in motion, with the Starship project aiming to make interplanetary travel a reality. They were designing a spacecraft capable of carrying hundreds of people to Mars, along with all the necessary resources to establish the first human colony. It was an ambitious goal, but Elon had always thrived on taking on the impossible. As the first few months passed since SpaceX's lunar landing, the world began to recognize the monumental nature of what had been accomplished. The media buzzed with stories of humanity's newfound place in space, and SpaceX became a symbol of innovation and ambition. The successful lunar base was proof that humans could not only survive on the moon but thrive. Elon stood in the SpaceX headquarters, looking out over the bustling campus. The teams were already working on new designs for the Mars mission, refining everything from life support systems to propulsion technologies. There was still much to do, but the path forward was clear. We've only just begun, Elon said, as he turned to Gwyn, who was standing beside him. The moon is just the first step. Now we aim for Mars, and beyond. And so, as SpaceX's legacy on the moon solidified, Elon Musk's gaze remained fixed on the stars. The journey to Mars was the next great leap forward, a leap that would shape the destiny of humanity for centuries to come. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?